The room is quiet now, not silent, but hushed like a field before the wind stirs its stalks. The light around you has dimmed, and the day's noise has receded into memory. All that remains is the soft rustling of your blanket, the faint hum of something turning far outside your window, and the still presence of the space you occupy. If you listen gently, you might imagine the delicate creak of a paper screen folding open in some distant house. You might smell the slow, rising breath of sandalwood, coiling like a thought from a burner that glows faintly red, or feel the softness of a woven mat beneath you, not unlike the mats laid out long ago in rooms where people gathered to drink tea or to listen, as you now do, two stories not rushed, but unspooled. Beyond your walls, a breeze moves through leaves you cannot see, and a distant dog offers one short bark, then settles. Cicadas, or something like them, make their patterned call steady, repetitive, rhythmic, the kind of sound that only arises when no one needs to be heard, and as your breath slows, so too does the pace of time around you. You are still, you are safe. The world quiets, and somewhere behind that quiet, another world waits. Tonight, we step carefully not into a battlefield, not into a temple of gods, but into the dust and water of daily life, into a world long imagined as serene. Ancient China, its name alone may summon images of jade ornaments, still ponds, red lanterns, and poetry etched onto silk, and yet, what lies beneath that surface? We often picture a place of timeless wisdom and delicate refinement, but beneath the lacquer, there was labor. Beneath the brushwork, there was bone. The stillness of ancient scrolls hides the movement of countless lives shaped not just by beauty, but by hunger and command. Tonight you will travel through that deeper texture, not with haste, and not with burden, but gently, steadily, with eyes half closed and breath low. Because history does not always live in the noise of battles or in the rise of empires. Sometimes, it lives in repetition, in rice stalks swaying under heat, in footsteps over packed soil, in the long, quiet patience of survival. And by revisiting that past, not to judge it, or to study it, but to rest within it, we begin to understand our own stillness. History, tonight, becomes not a place of urgency but of quiet companionship. So where shall we go? First we will rise alongside a villager person with no name carved in stone, whose life was spent in the rhythm of planting, bowing, feeding, and obeying. You will feel the weight of humid air over flooded rice paddies, the pressure of expectation from both government and ancestors, and the ache of a body asked to do too much, too often. Then, from those fields, we'll step into the world of a woman who ruled with ink and steel and pursue. You'll hear how power spoke softly, but watched constantly, how alliances were written in calligraphy, and betrayals hidden in ritual. Later you'll descend into the earth, into a tomb lined with thousands of silent stone soldiers, each carved with care, their purpose unknown, their silence eternal. Were they guardians, or propaganda, or dreams made manifest? We'll wander together. And finally, we'll drift along the trade roads, those long and lonely arteries of silk and salt where noblemen and envoys navigated danger, negotiation, and isolation under shifting stars. But before the walls of palaces, before the steps of emperors, before the silk robes and hanging scrolls, let us begin with the field, with the flooded lowlands, with the quiet weight of a single day lived far from glory. As you listen, there is no need to remember, no need to focus. Let the words pass through you like water through fingers. Let the stories rise like incense, smoke, and fade in their own time. If you drift, you drift. If your eyes grow heavy, that is welcome. This journey does not require attention, it only asks stillness. And if your thoughts wander perhaps to something you left undone today, or to a worry not yet named, gently return. Return to the soft sounds of water lapping in a pail, to the feeling of packed earth beneath worn sandals, to the flicker of a lantern behind a wooden lattice. In ancient China, everything moved by pattern, by season, by cycle, and now so do we. For the people of that time, life unfolded in repetition. Days were divided not by freedom, but by obligation. Each morning mirrored the last, and each evening held the same rituals. But inside that sameness was meaning. A meaning passed from ancestor to child, from official to subject, from heaven to earth. The jade we admire today was once a tool of burial. The poetry we memorize was once scratched into bamboo by cold, calloused hands. The gardens we see in paintings were tended by workers who never walked through their gates. And still, life endured. Not because it was glorious, but because it had to. So now, let your body settle. Let your breath follow the path of the Yangtze, slow and wide. Let your mind unfurl like a silk banner in morning breeze. And listen not for action, but for rhythm. Not for excitement, but for depth. You will not be tested. You will not be startled. You will only be carried, through fields and courts and stone-lined tombs, through shadow and incense, through a world that was never quite serene but always enduring. The morning arrives before your eyes open, not with urgency, but with a slow, creeping insistence, the kind that pulls at your senses rather than shakes them awake. You are lying on a tightly packed mat of woven straw, its rough texture pressing unevenly against the side of your face and the length of your spine, tracing impressions into your skin that you'll feel long after standing. The mat is laid directly over compacted earth, cold and slightly damp, and though the hut around you has done its best to hold back the night air, the moisture clings to the wooden beams and earthen walls like dew on an old leaf. In the dark, the faint buzz of a mosquito hovers near your ear, quickly followed by the soft whine of another near your ankle. Familiar companions in a home with no windows, only slats covered in fabric to filter the dust and wind. You shift slightly, quietly, careful not to wake the others in the space. A child's foot grazes your shin. Your mother or sister's breath puffs in steady intervals near your shoulder. The scent of human closeness, skin, wool, sweaters, subtle but unmistakable, woven into the air like thread into linen. No room is wasted. No corner belongs to one person. Everything is shared: blankets, air, silence. Then, slowly, the sounds of the outside world begin to layer in. First, a rooster calls, not sharp, not demanding, just announcing its presence in the far corner of the village. Then the low grunt of an ox from a neighboring stall, the creak of a wooden fence pushed open, the patter of chicken feet on packed soil. A pot clatters onto a hearthstone, a ladle scrapes through grain. These are not sharp sounds, but neither are they soft. They exist in the liminal space between sleep and duty, urging the body to rise, even as the mind lingers beneath the blanket. You sit up slowly. There is no reason to rush. The day is long and the work is not forgiving of wasted energy. You fold your blanket and push it into the woven basket where it lives, a gesture practiced, thoughtless in its precision. The chill of the morning air is no longer bracing, it is a known quantity, accepted without resistance. You stretch your legs out before you, flex your toes, rub gently at the places where sleep pressed you into the earth. The door, if it can be called that, is a wooden frame with a cloth hung over it, mended many times. Its original dye long faded. You push it aside, and the outside world drifts in to meet you. The first light of day is not bright but milky, filtered through a soft mist that has gathered overnight between the rice paddies and the low-slung rooftops. The ground is wet with dew, and your feet immediately feel the cool grit of soil, sand, and crushed husk beneath them. Around you, the village is awakening, not with shouts or song, but with movement. A boy walks past with a bucket that sloshes slightly against his thigh. A girl sweeps her doorway with a handmade broom of straw and twine. An old woman murmurs a chant as she rearranges the incense bowl near her family's threshold. The scent of rice from last night's pot still clings to the air, mingled with smoke from damp kindling being coaxed into flame for the morning meal. You move toward the water jar, an old ceramic vessel positioned under a slight overhang to catch rain and store well water when rain does not come. The rim is chipped but smooth, worn down by years of fingers and cups. You dip your hands in slowly, letting the water sit in your palms before lifting it to your face. It is cool, tinged faintly with the mineral taste of its clay vessel. The shock of it against your cheeks, your forehead, your eyes, is enough to signal the full arrival of the day. You do not scrub. There is no soap, only the purifying gesture of contact, of renewal. If there is a second jar beside it, one with floral-infused oil or ground herbs, you dab it onto your neck, behind your ears, a sign of respect, not for yourself, necessarily, but for the world you are about to re-enter, the living world, and the unseen one, those watching ancestors whose favor you must not take for granted. Your clothing is folded nearby. A tunic, of course, flax or hemp, depending on your family's means, stiffened slightly from repeated wear and washing. You pull it over your head, feeling it settle into the grooves of your shoulders like a second skin. The sash is tied with practiced hands, twice around the waist, knotted low. Sandals made of rope and bark are pulled on next. They're already worn through at the heel. Small stones sometimes work their way between the sole and your skin, but they are what you have. Some mornings the straps snap, and you must pause to rebind them. Today, they hold. You breathe in, deep and slow, adjusting to the weight of the day. There are no mirrors here. Your reflection, if you care to seek it, lives only in the ripples of a basin, or the sheen of a polished bowl. Your face, to you, is not a statement of self. It is just a face undarkened, wind-burnished, shaped by the same forces that shape the soil. And as you step into the morning light, the sky pale but promising heat. You feel your role not as an individual moving with purpose, but as a thread woven into a pattern older than you. A pattern that requires repetition, that demands continuation. The dogs are awake now, trotting from shadow to shadow. A child's cry lifts briefly, quickly silenced by a mother's firm voice. A bird lands on a low branch, shakes itself, and begins its rhythmic call. Nothing startles, nothing rushes, and still, everything is moving forward. And outside, the day does not wait. The garments you wear today are not new, and they were never meant to be. They carry the weight of use, of necessity, of time rubbed into every fiber. The tunic that now rests against your skin is made of coarse linen or perhaps hempits, weave imperfect, uneven in parts, softened by repeated washing in creek water and the oils of the body. Once it may have been white, or close to it, but now it holds the muted brown of dust and sun, with faint vertical stains that will never entirely lift. At the hem, a careful patch has been sewn-stitched, not by vanity, but by prudence perhaps, by your mother or an elder sibling who no longer needs to be reminded how to thread the needle through tough, resistant cloth. The thread doesn't match, but it holds. That is enough. As your hands smooth the garment over your chest and waist, you note the places where the fabric pulls unevenly, where the sleeves hang slightly longer than each other. There is no mirror, but your fingers know every crease, every fray. You do not own many pieces, perhaps 2 tunics for the entire year, and this one, though worn, is dry. It was hung carefully on a bamboo rod near the hearth, where smoke from last night's fire kept the dew from settling too deeply. There is no shame in these clothes, only continuity. As you tie the waist sash twice, firmly, to prevent it from slipping during work, you are not dressing for display. You are dressing for a day that will require every movement, every repetition, to be efficient. Your legs are wrapped with simple cloth bands tight enough to stay in place, loose enough to allow circulation. Their purpose is both practical and traditional. Insects, thorns, and mud cannot climb as easily over fabric. And though the wraps are no longer white, the act of putting them on still holds a kind of sacredness and inherited memory of protection, of preparation. The sandals come next. They are made of plaited reeds or softened bark, and the soles are cracked, worn thin at the heel, curved by your own weight. The straps dig slightly into the tops of your feet, especially where one has been knotted after breaking last week. You bend, slowly, tying each loop, adjusting each wrap. It takes time, but you do not rush. The day will take enough from your body, there is no need to fight the morning. Before stepping outside, there is one more thing that must be done, always. You turn to the corner of your dwelling where the small altar sits, a raised platform made of stone and clay, positioned carefully to face the rising sun, though the light has not yet reached it. On this surface are items not meant to be touched casually. A shallow bowl where ashes gather, a pair of upright incense sticks, burnt halfway down, a red thread tied around a carved wooden tablet bearing names, spoken only in reverence, never in haste. These are your ancestors, not abstract concepts, but real presences. People once living, once breathing, now watching. They see what you do, they hear what you say. They feel when you forget them, and to forget is unthinkable, not only impolite, but dangerous. Misfortune is not random in this world. It arrives when balance is broken, when memory lapses, when ritual is neglected. So you kneel, not with fanfare, but with the steadiness of someone who has done this every morning of their life. Your knees touch the packed earth, your hands, dry and work-worn, fold in front of you. You bow once, slowly, then again. The second bow is deeper, a third, for good measure, just to be safe. Your eyes do not rise to the tablet. You do not need to see it. You feel its presence as surely as you feel the floor beneath your knees. You murmur a few words, not a full prayer, but a promise, a reaffirmation of obedience. You speak names, those of your father's father, your mother's mother, and beyond, names that feel like weathered stones in your mouth. Their syllables are not easy, but they are important. If one is skipped, your mind will fixate on it all day. Some mornings you forget one, and the guilt lingers like a misplaced object in your sleeve. Today, you remember them all. The incense is lit with a glowing coal. Smoke rises in lazy spirals. You do not breathe it in, it belongs to them. You back away from the altar, never turning your back until the last step clears the boundary of its sacred space. This moment, this act, will not be recorded in any chronicle. It will not appear in any history, but it is perhaps the most carefully observed moment of your day. Not by others, but by the world itself, which expects you to do things the way they've always been done. The clothing you wear, the gestures you make, the thread tying your sash, all of it is part of a larger system that stretches behind you like a shadow. You are not free, but you are anchored, and that anchor is, in its own way, a kind of comfort. Others may forget. You will not. Not if you want your harvest to come in full. Not if you want your child's fever to break. Not if you wish to keep death outside your doorway, at least for one more day. So now, with tunic smoothed, foot-traps tied, and breath steady from ritual, you step outside. The mist has not lifted, and the path before you is damp. But something in you has realigned. You are dressed not for yourself, but for your role. You are bound not to fashion, but to order. And the ancestors have been greeted. Their silence is approval. The world is not cracked. The balance holds for now. The path to the field is familiar, worn not only by your feet, but by the generations that came before you, packed smooth and curved slightly where the wheels of handcarts have carved shallow grooves into the soil. As you walk, the sky has shifted from misty pale to a fuller brightness, though the sun itself still hides behind low, sluggish clouds that carry the weight of past and future rain. The air is thick, not oppressively hot, not yet but dense, as though it carries weight rather than wind. You arrive at the edge of the paddy and pause, as you always do, to observe what awaits you. Before you stretches a shallow expanse of water, motionless except for the occasional ripple caused by an insect, a frog, or the wind brushing low over its surface. The mud beneath is not dry earth softened by rain. It is a living, breathing medium, soft-sucking, heavy. It yields to weight, but not without resistance. A layer of water just deep enough to reach your shins hides its true nature. You step in slowly, sandals tied around your neck or tucked under a rock for later. Your bare feet press down, and the mud accepts them with a wet sigh, a gentle squelch that seems both welcoming and reluctant. It is warm, warmer than expected, and smooth but not clean. Strands of submerged weeds brush your ankles. Bits of stone or broken stalk jab at your soles with every step. You move carefully. There is no rushing this. The smell is distinct and complex, part earthy, part stagnant, a mingling of wet growth and decaying stalks, touched faintly by the memory of animal dung used in fertilizer months ago and the mineral tang of the nearby stream that feeds the channels. Insects hover low over the surface. A dragonfly flickers by, its wings iridescent and sharp, vanishing as quickly as it came. The air is full of quiet sounds, the hum of flies, the occasional croak of something hidden, the rhythmic splash of your neighbor entering from the opposite side. You nod, though you do not speak. There is no need. Everyone knows what needs to be done. The rice is young, this is a planting day, and the green shoots are neatly bundled nearby in baskets. You reach for one, taking care not to drop the slender stalks, which are delicate at this stage but stubborn once rooted. You wade forward, bend low, and begin. Planting is not dramatic. It is not fast. It is not noble. It is a labor of angle, reach, plant, step, reach, plant, step. Each movement is mirrored by the body beside you. The field is a shared space, not owned but used in rhythm with the needs of the village and the schedule set by weather, ancestors, and the local headman. You work in rows that are only visible to those who know how to see them, lines, marked not by sight, but by muscle memory and invisible alignment. Bending at the waist becomes its own language. The body folds again and again, spine curving toward the earth like a drawn bow, then rising, only slightly, before folding once more. The mud clings to your fingers as you press the root bundle down, twisting slightly so it holds, so it stands. Water laps against your wrists, your knees, your waist. The mud becomes your skin. It is not unpleasant, but it is constant. Flies land on your arms, sweat gathers on your neck and runs downward. The sun, now higher, reflects sharply off the water's surface, blinding you in flashes each time you look up. You hear others behind you, families from the next hut, row moving into the adjacent plot. Their footsteps, the rustling of cloth, the clatter of tools resting on a rock, all part of the soundtrack of a planting day. You do not speak, but you know they are there, and that matters. In this world, nothing is done alone. Tools are borrowed and returned without words. A bucket left by the gate is used by 3 households. A broken spade is quietly replaced by someone who had the good fortune of an extra. This is not charity. It is necessity. When water floods the wrong paddy, you divert it together. When one family's yield suffers, food is shared. Not because of kindness, though kindness exists, but because survival demands interdependence. You and your neighbors do not always agree. Arguments happen, especially over water rights, planting order, borderlines, but they are resolved quickly, because the rice does not care about disputes. It must go in, on time. Every time, the sun creeps higher, and you feel its fingers pressed more firmly against the back of your neck, against your shoulders. your spine. The sweat becomes a film over your skin. Your hands, now coated with mud and green sap, begin to lose sensitivity. Each new shoot feels like the last. Each row feels like the previous. You cannot tell if you are halfway through or just beginning. There is no shade. You look up once, briefly, and see the ridge line in the distance shimmering slightly. Heat rises from the water, making the world appear to breathe. Your calves ache. Your thighs have gone numb. Your arms are heavy, but they do not shake. Not yet. You steal a glance toward the far edge of the field, where the old man stands not working, but watching. He is past planting age, his hands twisted by time, his back bent more permanently than the rest. He says nothing, he doesn't need to. His presence is the memory of how this has always been done. His approval is invisible, but felt. You move a little more precisely, straighten your line, adjust your rhythm. Around you, the field has taken on its own tempo. There is no conversation, only the splashes, the squelch, the sound of breath, and the steady chorus of hands doing what hands must do. And then, beneath it all, the first whisper of tiredness. Not exhaustion yet, but the slow, creeping sensation that the morning is not finished, but your strength is already counting its coins. Your lower back sends up a message of stiffness. Your hands begin to resist the motion, not loudly, not painfully, just insistently. The body begins to wonder how many more hours must pass before rest. You do not answer, you do not ask. You bend, you plant, you step. The heat presses harder. You do not drink. Water must be fetched and saved. The wind, when it comes, is not cool but thick. It smells of mud and crop. You do not notice the time. There is no bell, no hourglass, only the slow advance of your shadow, the deepening of the sun's color, and the vague understanding that soon it will be time to eat if there is anything left from the evening meal. You do not resent this life, but you do not romanticize it, either. It is not a punishment. It is not a blessing. It is the pattern of things. It is the shape of what must be. And in its repetition there is a kind of comfort, though that comfort does not make it easier, only clearer. You plant again, and the field, in its quiet hunger, receives everything you offer. There is no bell to signal midday, no chime to break the labor into neat portions, only the position of the sun, now almost directly above, glaring without mercy, and the quiet, unspoken agreement among the workers that it is time to pause. The work is not finished, never finished, but the body cannot go on without fuel. You step out of the paddy with effort, the mud holding your ankles like a reluctant partner in a dance that has gone on too long. Your feet leave prints on the drier soil of the pathway, thick with residue that will harden and crack as it dries. You reach for the rag hung on a nearby stick and wipe your hands, not to clean them entirely, but to reduce the worst of the grime. A simple act, but even this has its order. There is one cloth for hands, another for tools. You sit down, not on a bench or stool, but directly on the ground, where the dust clings to your damp skin and stains the back of your tunic. Around you, others are doing the same, spreading small cloths or leaves on which they place their modest meals. No one speaks. There is nothing to say that hasn't already been said, in glances, in shared burdens, in the synchronized rhythm of labor. This is not a feast, not even a proper meal in the celebratory sense. It is simply the act of eating, a necessary pause before the work continues. Your lunch is cold. It always is. The rice, cooked before sunrise, is now slightly hardened, its texture no longer soft but firm, sometimes clumped into bite-sized masses from the steam that condensed in its container. It was wrapped in cloth, or stored in a lidded wooden box, and while it has retained some moisture, there is no warmth, no fragrance beyond the subtle earthiness of the grain itself. Alongside the rice is a small dish, perhaps no bigger than your palm, containing pickled vegetables, mustard greens, radish, or slices of fermented turnip cut thin, preserved in brine so salty it makes the lips tighten involuntarily. The vegetables are sharp, pungent, their flavor bold against the plainness of the rice. There is no meat today. There was no meat yesterday. Perhaps there will be some during the festival, when pigs are slaughtered and the fat rendered into broth. But for most days, meat is not food, it is memory, myth, or medicinal exception. When it appears, it is a scrap added to porridge for a sick elder, or offered at an altar before being consumed. Today, there is only rice and salt. You eat slowly, not from discipline but from necessity. Every bite must count. The meal is small and the day is long. You do not chew quickly. You do not take mouthfuls larger than your hand can feed. The chopsticks you use are carved from bamboo, smooth but imperfect. One is slightly longer than the other. It does not matter. You hold them with care and raise each bite with a movement so rehearsed it feels instinctual. There is a rhythm to it: select, lift, chew, swallow, pause. Your knees are drawn up. Your elbows rest against them. You are not alone, but you are not part of a conversation. Others around you eat in the same way, heads bowed, eyes unfocused, lost in thought or not thinking at all. Occasionally someone coughs. A child giggles in the distance, chasing a dog. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of cooking fires from a different field. Someone who brought their pot close to the worksite, heating up last night's porridge for a second use. You glance briefly, without envy. You know what they have. You know what you don't. It's understood. Food is not taken for granted, not even the most modest of bowls. The rice in your hand came from a harvest that barely covered the household quota last season. The pickles were made in clay jars during the winter, buried partway into the ground to keep them from spoiling. Tended with the same care given to a sick child. Every grain matters. Every sliver of vegetable carries the weight of labor: planting, watering, watching the skies. In good years, there is enough to feel safe. In bad years, you begin to calculate your next bite before you finish the last. You've heard the stories from elders, whispered when children were supposed to be sleeping, of years when the rains didn't come, or came too much, too fast, and drowned the shoots. Of years when the granaries were full, but not yours. When merchants raised prices without reason, and landowners sent collectors to take a share you couldn't afford to give. When people began to trade their tools, then their blankets, then their futures. Drought, flood, frost, all silent, invisible enemies that shape the shape of your meal. Sometimes, hunger is not sharp. It is not dramatic. It is a quiet reduction. Less rice today than yesterday. A skipped meal in the evening. A child told to wait a little longer, hoping they fall asleep before they remember they were hungry. You know how to stretch food, not just how to make it last, but how to stretch the very idea of eating, how to stretch fullness across a span of time that doesn't want to be bridged. Hunger becomes something you wear, not visible, not loud, but always present, like a second shadow. There are those in the village who hide it better than others, who eat a little more, who trade well, who know someone higher up. But even they, in the hardest years, must reckon with the same truth. Food is not guaranteed. It never has been, and each bite you take today is both nourishment and luck. You are eating, you are still strong enough to work. That is not nothing. You finish slowly, scraping the last grains from your box, licking the pickled juice from your fingers because it cannot be wasted. You close the lid with care, tie the cloth back around it, and set it beside you. You rest, briefly. Your back against a tree root, your eyes half closed. You do not sleep. There is no time. But you drift, just for a moment, into a quiet that is not rest but not labor either. Around you, others are finishing too. Some stand early, stretching their arms. Others sit longer, staring out at the horizon. No one says, "It's time." The body knows. The sun says enough. And the work unromantic, unchanging, There is a specific kind of silence that descends when the tax agents arrive, not the peaceful hush of sleep, nor the reverent stillness of ritual, but a thick, watchful pause, like air pressed between clenched teeth. You feel it first before you hear the sound of footsteps on the road. Boots made of stiff cloth and padded leather, deliberate in pace, accompanied by the creak of an ox cart carrying the grain scales, the tablets, the painted seals, and perhaps, if you're unlucky, the bound wooden sticks used for punishment. You do not greet the officials with cheer. You do not ask them questions. You do not even make eye contact unless spoken to. They wear the silk-robed authority of the magistrate's office, but they are not from your village. They do not labor beside you in the fields. Their arrival is brief, clinical, and consequential. They have scrolls bearing quotas assigned to your region by men who never bent over a rice paddy or knelt before the ancestor altar with an empty belly. These numbers are not suggestions, they are declarations. You must give what you have, and sometimes what you don't. The taxes are taken in grain first. Bundles of husked rice, stacked and bound with reed rope, set out under the eye of the steward. If it is a good year, the family has planned for this, stored extra, dried properly, measured to exact weight. If the year has been poor, and many are the grain offered may be light, shriveled, or short in measure, there is no leniency for poor weather. The sky cannot be taxed, but your house can. If you do not meet the quota in rice, you may offer labor. This too is not kindness, it is a calculation. One body for a stretch of days, working on the magistrate's roads, the walls, the canals, the storage sheds of a landowner you've never met. Your time is theirs now. And if you cannot offer rice or labor, then the household must surrender something else, perhaps a bronze tool. A jar of preserved radish, a piece of cloth, a daughter's dowry, or the promise of next year's harvest in advance. No one questions the figures. They are carved into bamboo slips, signed with ink and stamp. You are shown the characters, often unreadable to you, but you nod anyway. To challenge is to disrespect. To disrespect is to invite punishment. It is not uncommon for a man to lose his field's rights over a misunderstanding, or for a widow to find her name erased from the granary rolls after raising her voice. The law is not law in the abstract. It is whoever holds the writing brush and the soldiers behind them. The enforcers do not shout. They do not need to. Their presence is heavy enough. You can hear it in the silence of your neighbors, the way children are pulled indoors, the way dogs stop barking. One wrong word could mark your household for closer inspection. And what then? What if they notice the hidden bundle of millet tucked beneath the thatch? What if they count the children and ask why one is missing? Was he sent away to avoid conscription? What if they look too closely at the harvest and declare that more could have been spared? So families plan, not just for the tax, but for the act of being taxed. Weeks before the collectors come, meals are adjusted, less is eaten, storage is double-checked. Some rice is packed loosely to look fuller. Some bundles are placed in more prominent view to suggest abundance, while the rest is hidden, carefully, in places that would not be searched unless suspicion were already drawn. Behind walls, under mats, in sealed jugs labeled as ash or waste. Fathers and mothers argue in whispers at night over what can be spared over, how to give just enough to satisfy, but not so much that the household starves. A child might be sent to live with a relative to villages away, just until the record books are closed for the season. An elderly grandparent may volunteer to work on the road crew, sparing the younger adults from days of sun exposure and blisters. The decision is not made with ease, but with necessity. It is not heroic, it is not tragic, it is the math of survival. There are stories never told in daylight of bribes, of a duck offered quietly, of coins slipped into the official's hand, of a favored family spared inspection because of an uncle who once served in the magistrate's hall. But these are exceptions, and they come with their own price. To be noticed by the taxman is to be seen, and to be seen is dangerous. So the wise do not draw attention. They pay what is asked, they bow, they offer tea, they apologize for anything lacking, no matter how honest their effort. They remain small, invisible, compliant. It is safer that way. And yet, there is bitterness, not spoken aloud, but carried in the hands as grain is poured into the official baskets. In the eyes of a mother who watches her son walk away with the labor gang, knowing he will sleep on stone and return thinner than before. In the tightening of jaws around dry mouths when a magistrate praises the good order of the province, while stepping over the patched sandals of those who made it so. You think of the time you spent in the field, the hours planting, the hours harvesting, the cuts on your fingers from the stalk sand. Now you see a portion of it vanish into the cart bound for a city you will never visit. You wonder if they will store it well, if rats will eat it before anyone does, if someone will sell it at profit while you ration your next bowl of rice. Still, you do not rebel. That is not your world. Rebellion is for generals and poets, not for farmers whose first thought each morning is whether the rain will be kind or cruel. You endure, you calculate, you adapt, and when the officials are gone, when their carts creak down the road, their seals stamped, their lists checked, you breathe again. Not relief, not joy, just the fragile exhale of one more obligation fulfilled. You return to your work. The field is still there, the sky still wide, and the cycle will repeat, as it always does. Another season, another harvest, another visit, and always another decision what to give, what to hide, and how much of yourself can be spared without breaking. The sun is not yet gone, but its sharpness has begun to ease, folding into the haze above the hills as the world shifts into a slower rhythm. One you do not set, but simply follow. Your feet are sore, your hands chapped, your back bent from the day's toil, and yet, as always, there is more to be done. The work of survival is rarely loud, never complete, and often invisible, seen only in the quiet rituals that shape the fading hours of light. You return to the courtyard slowly, each step deliberate, not from grace but from exhaustion. Others arrive too, in a staggered procession, uncles with tired shoulders, sisters wiping sweat from their brows, a grandmother carrying a child too young to walk home alone. No one speaks immediately. There is a silence that follows labor, not somber, but respectful, allowing the body to be heard after a day spent ignoring its pain. The cooking fire is already smoldering, a small cluster of twigs and dried dung arranged beneath a soot-blackened pot. Someone has drawn water earlier, likely before noon, and the clay vessel it rests in is wrapped in damp cloth to keep it cool. You crouch to tend the flames, fanning them with a worn palm frond until they crackle again, just enough to bring the water to a gentle boil. There is no grand meal to be prepared, just enough rice for everyone, perhaps a few remaining vegetables salted and simmered into a thin broth. If fortune smiled, there might be a scrap of dried fish, rehydrated and torn into small pieces, but if not, no one will complain. Hunger is a familiar guest, and dinner is more about ritual than indulgence. You stir slowly, watching the steam curl upward, mixing with the smell of smoke and evening dust. Nearby, a child scrubs tools in a shallow basin, rinsing mud from a hoe, wiping down the bamboo handles with care learned by imitation. Another coils rope, looping it neatly to hang from a wooden peg on the wall. These tasks are not spoken as commands. They are known, absorbed from repetition, expected without instruction. The adults watch but do not interfere. In this too, there is rhythm. The household is an organism, each part moving toward rest, each gesture small but meaningful. You hear the sound of slippers scuffing against stone, the hollow knock of a gourd being set on the ground, the soft murmur of someone recounting the day's smallest memento: a snake spotted near the path, a neighbor's child who refused to work, a merchant who passed by with no intention of stopping. These stories are not important in content, but in presence. They mark time, they soothe. As the food finishes, bowls are passed without ceremony. Each person receives enough to quiet the stomach, not fill it. You eat on the ground, back resting against a cool wall, eyes half-lidded. Occasionally, someone speaks a memory, a quiet question, a light joke, and then it fades back into chewing and sighs. No one eats quickly. Fatigue slows everything. The fire dies down. The bowls are emptied and stacked. A girl licks her fingers and wipes them against her tunic, already stained from days of the same. She is not scolded. Cleanliness has its place, but so does grace. A dog curls beside the doorway. The moon is rising, casting light too faint to read by, but bright enough to see each other's faces in outline. The family remains together a little longer, gathered in a semicircle that radiates familiarity, not formality. And then the washing begins. A basin is filled with tepid water. One by one, each person splashes a handful across the face, over the arms, down the legs. There is no soap, not always, but the water itself provides a feeling of release, of the day sliding off, grain by grain. A cloth is passed around, dampened, used to wipe sweat from the neck, dust from the forearms, the grease from chins. A child shivers, not from cold but from transition, the warmth of the day leaving, the body exposed to cooler air. You dry your feet carefully before wrapping them in cloth and slipping into frayed sandals. Not because you will walk far, but because the ground is rough, and the body is tender at the edges now. A mat is rolled out, a thick weave of reeds, patched in places where time has eaten through. You place it on the floor beside others, no space for privacy, but ample room for shared dreams. Before sleep, a few words are offered to the altar, simple phrases, spoken softly but with gravity. Gratitude for food, for safety, for another day. A stick of incense is lit, its smoke curling toward the rafters in a gentle spiral. Someone adjusts the family tablet, making sure it is upright, centered. The ancestors must be honored, not out of love necessarily, but out of balance. To forget them is to risk everything, to invite misfortune, illness, disbirth. Even when the body aches, the ritual must be done. One misstep, one missed word, and guilt follows like shadow. The night deepens. You lie down beside your siblings, your parents, your kin. Some mats are softer than others, filled with more stuffing, but none are luxurious. You feel every knot, every uneven strand beneath your ribs. Still, it is comfort of a kind. A body, emptied of strength, does not ask for softness, it asks only to stop moving. Your eyes begin to close. Someone coughs, a dry sound, persistent. A mother whispers something to the child curled at her side, adjusting the blanket, placing a hand on their forehead. It's not fever, not yet, but the worry is real. A shape pressed into the air between breaths. Another person snores gently. A creak, a sigh, a shift, and then silence. Outside, the night is still but not quiet. Insects sing, a dog barks once in the distance, then is quieted. A breeze stirs the leaves above the courtyard. Lanterns glow dimly, casting golden pools across the floor. You breathe slowly, matching the pace of the dark. There is no light to guide dreams here. No comfort beyond what you create with your own hands, with the steady effort of routine. But there is peace, too, not in freedom, but in familiarity, in knowing what comes next. The body resting, the fire out, the ancestors watching. The world, for now, still. Another day done, another sunrise waiting. That is the rhythm now, an endless thread, quiet and predictable, weaving across weeks, across seasons, across lifetimes. You lie still, your limbs heavy, your breath slow, and your thoughts unfurl like smoke in a cold room. There is no end-of-day celebration, no moment of clarity or reward. The day has simply concluded, its tasks finished, its demands met, its time exhausted, and tomorrow will come again, shaped by the same hands that shaped this one. In this ancient rhythm, you are not alone, yet loneliness remains. You are surrounded by family, by ancestors, by duty, and, still, in the silence before sleep, something inside you stirs, faintly restless. It is not ambition. That would be too loud, too dangerous. It is simply a wondering whether life might ever become less narrow, less circular, less carved into grooves so deep that even your dreams follow them. There is a soft fear beneath your bones. Not of death, not exactly, but of failing to meet what is expected, of letting a harvest spoil, of misplacing a name at the altar, of becoming the one who does not fulfill what must be fulfilled. That fear does not scream, it hums, it stays. You feel it when you bow too quickly. You feel it when the food runs thinner than it should. You feel it when a child misbehaves and you wonder whether the ancestors noticed. The presence of the ancestors is not always comforting. It is persistent. It is dense. Their eyes are everywhere, in the quiet flicker of an oil lamp, in the creak of a wooden beam at night, in the blank stare of the ancestral tablet, gazing out without expression, but never without weight. To honor them is not to love them. It is to fear their silence. It is to obey their memory, and when you forget even for a moment, you carry it like a stone in your pocket for days. You are expected to carry many things: the water buckets, the tools, the sorrow of a sibling's death, the ache of a marriage arranged without joy, the dullness of days that blur into one another with no variation but the weather. These are not spoken of. You do not ask, "Are you happy?" Because that is not the question the world asks of you. The question is, have you done what is required? And when the answer is yes, that must be enough. So you endure. And sometimes, in the smallest cracks, you find your own kind of peace. A smile from a child, the warmth of cooked rice, a breeze that carries the scent of plum blossoms from a tree planted decades ago. These are the moments that do not save you, but they soften you. They keep you from cracking beneath the pressure of all that is unspoken. Lying on your mat, you hear the night settle, not silence, but a thinning of sound, the wind brushing the doorframe, a cough in another room, the soft exhale of someone turning over in their sleep. The rhythm of life has not stopped, it has simply gone underground, into the dreaming world. You are too tired to think, but not yet asleep. Your thoughts do not form words now. They form impressions, echoes of the field, the face of your father, the scent of sesame oil on your fingers, the strange curve of a bird's cry at dusk. You do not dream of escape. That idea is too foreign, too modern. Instead, you drift toward a place where duty becomes diffuse, where memory blurs into image, where the ancestors are not watching but simply resting beside you. You have carried the day. You will carry the next. This is understood. This is fixed. But for now, your body has been allowed to stop. Your mind can begin to soften at the edges. The world will not ask anything more of you tonight. No rice to thresh, no names to remember, no records to offer. You are allowed to vanish for a few hours, not into freedom, but into suspension, into that quiet place where the ceiling is dark, the floor is cool, and your breath moves without effort. Another day done, another sunrise waiting, in this world, and now, your own. Before she was empress, before her name was written in the calligraphy of imperial edicts or whispered in the corners of palace corridors, she was simply Wu Zhao, a daughter of the Wu family of Shaanxi, born not into royal lineage but into a home of comfort, literacy, and ambition cloaked in discretion. Her father, a timber merchant and an official, ensured that his children were educated, that their minds were shaped not only by custom but by poetry, by philosophy, by the slow, measured logic of Buddhist thought. In this household, Wu Xiao would have touched silk long before she was expected to wear it. She would have watched her elders compose letters with brushes dipped in ink, so thick it spread like dusk across a parchment. She would have known how to bow properly, how to remain still for long moments, and how to speak only when silence had made enough room for her voice. In this world, she learned the rules, not just of etiquette, but of presence. She learned how to listen when others thought no one was paying attention, how to step where footsteps had already faded, and how to wait without appearing idle. It was this early training, quiet, domestic, repetitive, that formed the deep foundations of a woman who would one day rise beyond the expectations of her time, And yet, in the beginning her rise began not with rebellion, but with obedience. She entered the imperial court at the age of 14 as a concubine to Emperor Taizong, not a wife, not a queen, one among many, assigned a rank far below the inner circle, known more for her beauty and lineage than for any particular favor. Life in the harem was both luxurious and stifling. Behind the red lacquered doors and silk curtains, dozens of women lived in a delicate equilibrium where friendship was touched with rivalry, and smiles often floated above unspoken calculations. The halls were always quiet, yet never empty. The floors were swept daily, and the scent of sandalwood lingered in the air, rising from incense bowls placed like watchful eyes at the feet of ancestors whose names were whispered but not questioned. Wu Zhao would have risen early each day, dressed by handmaidens in fine but regulated robes, each color, each sleeve length dictated by her rank, her hair combed into patterns that symbolized submission, her voice trained to speak only when spoken to. She walked in procession when summoned. She knelt on cool stone when the emperor passed, and mostly, she waited. Waited in her chamber for a summons that might never come, or might come when it no longer mattered. But waiting is not absence, it is observation, and she watched. She learned the language of favors granted and withdrawn. She saw how a misstep could exile a concubine from court, and how silence could sometimes be more effective than protest. She read, she prayed, she spoke to no one of her thoughts, but they gathered nonetheless. When Emperor Taizong died, palace custom dictated that the concubines without issue, those who bore no child, were to be sent to a convent, and so Wu Zhao's silks were replaced with the coarse robes of monastic life. Her jewelry returned to the treasury, her face no longer adorned with cosmetics. In the temple, she was meant to vanish, but fate, or perhaps intent, intervened. The new emperor, Gaozong, son of Taizong, had once seen Wu Zhao in the palace and had remembered her. Some say he visited the temple not for worship, but for her. Some say she returned to court with only modest persuasion. The stories vary. What remains is that she re-entered the palace not as a forgotten figure, but as a remembered possibility. She did not make noise, she resumed her role, and soon became a favored consort, not because she demanded it, but because she understood the balance between ambition and invisibility, between presence and threat. She bore children, she advised quietly, and around her, the court began to shift. Not suddenly, not with disruption, but like water slowly rerouting around a stone, changing its path, wearing it smooth, altering the course without anyone noticing. At first, she had returned, and this time, she would not leave. By the time Emperor Gozong's health began to falter, the rhythms of the court had already subtly shifted around Empress Wu like reeds, yielding to a steady, unseen current. At first, her influence moved within the walls of domestic protocol, managing palace affairs, overseeing the imperial household, handling petitions meant only for her review before they reached the emperor's tired eyes. But as Gozong's illness became more pronounced, his headaches persistent, his fatigue unmistakable, her presence became more than ceremonial. She did not seize power, she administered it. She did not demand authority, she filled its absence, and always, quietly, Empress Wu established patterns. The day began with carefully structured audiences. Reports from officials were reviewed in her private study, not shouted in open halls, but whispered across low tables, their contents passed and evaluated before ever reaching the imperial seal. Those who opposed her directly often found themselves reassigned, not condemned, but transferred to outlying provinces, appointed to honorific positions with no real function. Others were silenced by bureaucracy itself, their requests lost in transcription, their access to the emperor delayed indefinitely. She used ink and paper the way others used blades. She did not need to raise her voice, because she had mastered the palace's own architecture of control. One of her most subtle instruments was the formation of a group known later as the Golden Mirror Bureau. In name, it reflected the Confucian principle of rulers being mirrors to their people, but in practice, it served as an inner circle of scribes, monks, and eunuchs loyal to hurricord keepers and eyes behind lattice screens. Through them, she knew which governors were quietly amassing favor, which ministers exchanged gifts too frequently, which palace wives whispered into ears they should not have reached. But even surveillance was conducted with ritual precision. Petitions were reviewed in silence. Scrolls were copied by hand, the same words etched again and again to preserve continuity and control. Nothing appeared rushed, though decisions came swiftly when needed. When Empress Wu sought to remove the sitting Empress Wang and the favored concubine Zhao, she did not do so with fury. She did not storm chambers or call tribunals. She arranged for evidence to appear. Accusations of witchcraft, subtle enough to unsettle, specific enough to justify expulsion. The court gasped, but no one resisted. There were no bloody scenes, no confessions in chains, simply new titles granted to new figures, and the slow reshaping of precedence charts, rituals adjusted accordingly. The investiture ceremonies that followed were not rushed, but measured by the calendar, aligned with astrologers' approvals. Silk banners were hung, sacred fires were lit, officials gathered in robes heavy with meaning. Empress Wu received her new rank with calm and bowed to heaven and earth, as tradition required. It was not ambition made manifest, it was duty observed. Even the Confucian scholars, many of whom believed that a woman should not hold such influence, found themselves restrained by her attention to protocol. She did not break custom, she extended it. She invoked classic texts when needed, patronized the old academies, ensured her decrees echoed familiar philosophical cadences. She supported examinations based on merit. She expanded civil service access to families previously excluded, and in doing so she eroded the monopoly of the hereditary elite, not by force, but by invitation. New voices entered the court: scholars, monks, administrators from distant provinces, grateful, loyal, and quietly supportive. Her control deepened not through disruption, but through continuity. Temples were constructed in her name not flamboyantly, but as acts of spiritual merit. She aligned herself with the Buddhist doctrine of the Maitreya, the future Buddha who would bring justice. Images of her emerged not as tyrant or temptress, but as enlightened ruler, as mother of the people. Statues were carved, sutras commissioned, and always, the impression was of stillness, of legitimacy, not rebellion. Her rivals knew there was no ground from which to challenge her. The tools she used were too quiet, too embedded in the state's own systems. A governor who resisted found his tax records audited. A general who spoke against her found his supply lines rerouted. An official whose poetry mocked her found himself reassigned to a distant border post, where the winters were long and the dispatches unread. And through it all, Wu Zhao remained composed. She appeared in court in layered robes of imperial gold, her hair set with jade pins, her face serene beneath the weight of ceremonial powder. When she walked, she did so slowly, surrounded by silence, broken only by the light scrape of her sandals on tile. She did not need to raise her hand. Her presence, reinforced by thousands of bureaucratic gestures, was already absolute. But power in Wu's court was not garish. It was palatial and still, like a lotus pond surface, calm/depths unseen. And always, behind it, was the soft hum of ritual, the steady turn of seasons, the sound of paper brushed with ink. Names were remembered, names were removed, but none of it happened quickly, and none of it needed to. To rule was to endure, and Empress Wu no longer merely a consort, no longer a regent became, at last, the sovereign in her own right. In the year 690, she declared a new dynasty, Zhou, breaking from Tang not with revolution, but with renaming, reshaping, rewriting what the state meant through quiet force of legitimacy. It was not merely an ascension, it was a reorientation of the heavens and the earth under her gaze. She took for herself the title of Huangdi Emperor, not Empress Dowager, not co-ruler but ruler alone, with no male shadow beside her. And in that act, beneath the folds of her imperial golden robes, beneath the crown of phoenix and pearl, Wu Zhao became a singular figure in the long scroll of Chinese history. She moved through a court she had meticulously cultivated over decades, where each official was carefully placed, each role calibrated not only for loyalty but for knowledge, for ritual fitness, for willingness to align with a vision larger than inheritance. Her bureaucracy expanded, yes, but also deepened. Civil service examinations already existing were widened under her reign. More men of humble birth, of provincial families, now had a path toward office, not through lineage but through ink, brush, and merit. She preferred the diligent, the obedient, the intellectually precise. Ministers who once lounged on bloodlines alone now found their privileges eroding beneath a tide of scholar officials who owed their rise to her policies, their loyalty to her signature, and as their scrolls multiplied, so too did temples. Her patronage of Buddhism was not merely pious, but cosmic. Where Confucianism insisted on hierarchy, ancestry, and masculine order, Buddhism offered a different structure, one of enlightenment, of suffering shared by all, of rebirth beyond gender, beyond rank. She aligned herself with the figure of Maitreya, the future Buddha, casting her reign as fulfillment of a prophecy, her body as the vessel of salvation not through sword, but through sutra. Monks in distant provinces copied sermons that named her divine, not in thunderous declarations, but in the quiet cadence of sutra recitation. Over and over, as ink soaked into parchment, stone steles bore her likeness. Grottos were carved with images of female bodhisattvas, serene, wise, seated among clouds. And in the capital, the ritual calendar turned under her hand. She presided over the most sacred of rites, the Feng and Shan sacrifices performed only by emperors to harmonize heaven and earth. She journeyed to Mount Tai not as a woman seeking approval but as the pivot point between cosmos and command. The wind at those summits carried incense. The soil was pressed by her seal, the ceremonies unfolded with precision, bells rung at appointed moments, jade discs offered two cardinal directions, the names of dynasties spoken slowly into the open air. Yet even amidst grandeur, her world was not light. Solitude clung to her robes like incense after the altar. Few addressed her directly. Her sons, though princes, were watched closely, their ambitions trimmed by the knowledge that their mother was more than mother, she was emperor. Her court bowed deeply, but rarely spoke freely. Ministers reported in low voices, eunuchs delivered messages with eyes downcast, and beyond the palace walls, dissent sometimes whispered along market stalls or behind temple walls, grumblings from Confucian scholars who found her power unseemly, from aristocrats whose lineages had been sidestepped, from rivals waiting. But her control did not falter. Through a mesh of clerks, petitioners, archivists, and ritualists, she ensured that statecraft became rhythm. Scrolls opened in the morning, closed at dusk, sacrifices offered on full moons, edicts reviewed thrice before engraving. Even her decrees bore layered meanings, blessings paired with subtle warnings, reforms paired with obligations, appointments paired with expectations of silence. She continued to build temples with tall golden roofs, pagodas that caught sunlight across rivers, statues of seated Buddhas as still as the court that mirrored them. And in the echo of those chambers she walked in robes heavy with symbol, dragons embroidered at the hem, cranes across the sleeves, jade pendants clinking softly at each step. But robes, however golden, are still garments, and behind every seal pressed into wax was a hand that bore weight. Though history may remember her as firm, calculating, or even cruel, there is also a quiet to her reign, a sense that she governed not by storm, but by pressure, not by noise, but by continuity. Day by day, scroll by scroll, her dynasty moved forward, not swiftly, not joyfully, but steadily. And perhaps that was her gift, commanding not awe but persistence. She had made the empire hers, not by fire, but by ink. And now, as she ruled alone, the silence around her was not absence, but design. Time moves even through golden halls. In the final decade of her reign, the once firm rhythms of governance that Wu Xiao had conducted with precision began to slow, though not all at once. Age crept in, not with spectacle, but with fatigue. Her eyesight dimmed, her hearing softened, her walks through the palace became shorter, the weight of ceremony heavier. The corridors remained swept, the rituals still held, the incense still burned in high copper bowls, but beneath it all, a quiet erosion had begun. Trusted ministers died or retired. The bureaucracy, still vast, became more entangled. Factions stirred beneath the surface, old families hoping for a return to traditional order, sons watching their mother's throne with cautious reverence. And in her increasingly narrowed world, the empress turned inward, seeking companionship in the few who brought her comfort rather than questions. Among them were the Zhong Bros, Zhong Yetzi and Zhong Changsongyang, attentive and devoted to her not as a ruler of state, but as a woman, aged and surrounded by formality. They combed her hair, brought her scrolls, read her poetry aloud. Some whispered scandal, but history can be crueler than it is correct. In truth, they were perhaps her final circle of intimacy, those who did not require protocol, who sat near without pretense, who let her feel the quiet warmth of human presence in a palace where most words had long turned ceremonial. The court continued its cycles, taxes collected, grain measured, temples swept, but the empress herself appeared less frequently. Audiences shortened, decisions were deferred, scrolls piled unread until others opened them in her name. Her illness, whatever its nature, did not announce itself dramatically, it simply stayed. Her hands shook slightly when holding a brush, her voice, once firm even in softness, now wavered in long rituals, and those who had long waited sons, ministers, distant clans, began to shift their weight. A return to the Tang dynasty, they believed, was inevitable, and when the moment arrived, it was not a coup, not a blaze of rebellion, but a carefully sealed arrangement. In the 11th month of the lunar year 705, while resting in the Warong Hall, she was gently surrounded not with swords, but with signatures. Ministers she had once appointed came to her chambers. Eunuchs, long, loyal, bowed low and said nothing. A document was presented. She did not resist. She understood. Perhaps she had seen it coming for weeks. Perhaps she had known the silence of the court too well not to hear what was missing. She abdicated quietly, not with fury, not with lament. She removed the imperial seal and handed it over. Her dynasty, Zhou, dissolved with barely a murmur, like smoke curling upward after incense has gone cold. She was given a new title, Empress Dowager, again, and soon after, only months later, she passed away, not in disgrace, not in fire, but in the stillness of age fulfilled. She was buried with the honors accorded to an emperor. Her tomb-kindling faced the same heavens she had once addressed on Mount Tai. Her body was laid beside her husband, Gaozong, and above her grave, carved into the stone stele that would mark the place, there were no words, no inscription, no declaration of deeds or lineage, just smooth, stone-untouched, undecorated, waiting. Perhaps it was a political gesture, a refusal by successors to honor her with the written word, or perhaps, in some quiet way, it was appropriate. For a ruler whose power had so often been exercised in silence, whose influence flowed through brushstrokes and absence and repositioned names, perhaps no epitaph was needed. The cycle had closed. The dynasty turned once again, and history, like sleep, moved on. There are names that history remembers with noise, names inscribed with fanfare, names shouted across centuries, names tethered to conquest or catastrophe. And then, there are names like Wu Zhao's, names not erased, but muffled. Names that rise not with the drumbeat of battle, but with the soft scratch of a brush on silk scroll. She ruled for decades, outlasted rivals, shaped dynasties, and altered the path of an empire, but her stele, the towering monument that should have held her story, remained empty, carved, polished, placed in solemn ceremony, yet blank. Perhaps it was political. Perhaps those who followed her could not agree on how to describe her life, or did not dare to speak it. Or perhaps, in the final stillness of her reign, it was fitting, an emperor of ink and silence, whose power lay not in proclamations, but in edits, in the things not said, the people not appointed, the documents never copied, and so the stone waits, even now, beneath sky and moss, holding the weight of her memory without speaking it aloud. It is in that silence that one begins to understand. Power, when held for so long, does not shout, it endures, and endurance carries with it a toll. The solitude of ruling without equal, the rituals that replace conversation, the burden of being seen as divine, but never as human. For all her accomplishments, her bureaucratic reforms, her promotion of merit over birth, her bold challenge to Confucian orthodoxy, there lingers a soft trace of emotional cost. The long corridors of the palace were polished, yes, but cold. The throne was carved of lacquered wood and inlaid with jade, but its weight was constant. Even the garments woven with phoenix thread, layered with symbols of heaven, were heavy on the shoulders of someone who had no peer. She was feared, respected, admired, resented, but rarely, if ever, was she simply understood. The women of the harem, once her rivals, faded into their own silences. The sons she bore were raised beneath the expectations of dynasty, unable to rise without also threatening her rule, and even those who served her loyally did so beneath the ever-watchful gaze of protocol, where a word too close or a gesture too bold might be interpreted as ambition. In such a world, even trust is rich, and yet, through all of this, she remained, not as a tyrant in the traditional sense. Her cruelty, where it existed, was bureaucratic, not theatrical. Her executions were documented, not dramatized. Her control was managed through ink, through placement, through slow erosion of opposition. She did not need to raise her voice. The court moved around her like stars around the pole, predictable, constrained, ever orbiting. She knew the value of timing, the importance of weathering scandal rather than confronting it, the power of making others wait. She watched and waited and watched again, and by the time her rule became law, no one could remember a time when it had not been. In Buddhist imagery, she aligned herself with the Maitreya, the awaited one, the enlightened ruler. But perhaps it was not just a claim to divinity. Perhaps it was an aspiration to rule with calm, to bring order, to find clarity amidst the noise of court. And if her reign was not serene, it was at least methodical. Every year brought more temples, more clerks, more carefully orchestrated ritual, a government less defined by family than by function. And for a time, it worked. The land was relatively stable, roads were built, grain was measured, art was commissioned, and the memory of her grew not as a woman, not even as a monarch, but as a phenomenon. Today, historians still argue, was she cruel or just, a despot or a reformer? But the truth, as with most enduring stories, lies not in a verdict but in a tension. She was what the empire needed to survive a time of drift. She was also what the order of her day feared most. A woman who ruled without asking, and though she passed, though her dynasty gave way, though her name was occasionally omitted or minimized, it returned, again and again. In dramas, in novels, in political treatises, she never quite disappeared. Because something about her story lingers, something unresolved, something whispered. The weight of a crown is often felt most in solitude, and hers was heavier than most. History remembers her name, but not the breath between her words, the pauses in the audience hall, the long walks alone behind silk partitions, the hours spent deciding what not to write, and in that silence, in that space between action and memory, Wu Zhao remains like the blank stone over her tomb, present and unyielding, but waiting still. Let us drift now, away from the golden halls of power and the layered silence of Empress Wu's reign. The world turns, gently, and the dynasties pass. Centuries fall like leaves in slow wind. The Tang is no more. The song, too, has ended. Ming and Qing will rise, and one day even they will quiet. But deeper still, beneath time itself, something older waits. Something that was never meant to be seen. Imagine now not a palace, not a scroll, not a battlefield, but a dry, open field outside the city of Xi'an in 1974. The ground is hard, cracked, tired of centuries. A group of farmers move slowly under the sky, searching for water in the red dust. Their tools dig not with haste, but with repetition. One shovel, then another. The metal edge strikes something unfamiliar. Not stone, not bone, a sound that is dull, yet hollow. They uncover a shape. It is a head, life-sized terracotta expression, fixed eyes forward, lips pressed in eternal calm. Then another, and another, and another still. What lies beneath is not a well, it is a world built for silence, a world meant only for the dead. The first pit stretches long beneath the earth. Columns of soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, row after row, facing east. Each one is different, eyebrows arched in different ways, hair tied in slightly altered knots, tunics buttoned at angles just distinct enough to suggest humanity, lifelike, yet never living. Infantrymen, archers, charioteers, some kneel, some grip clay spears, all wait, without breath, without sound, without even the decay of flesh. The clay does not rot, the formations do not shift, nothing is out of place. Each figure stands upon ancient tiles, over earth carefully pressed by forgotten laborers. Even the dust, disturbed only after 2 millennia, settles quickly, as if the army does not wish to be seen too long. You might imagine the air down there is heavy, cool, but not refreshing, dry, but not empty. It is thick with the slow weight of time, of intention buried beneath centuries. The silence is not absence, it is design. It is power, stretched across centuries, resting now in formation. You may find yourself wondering who built this, and why. You are not alone. The questions began the moment the statues emerged and have not ceased since. Who imagined an army that would never march? Who decided clay men should guard a soul? Who thought memory could be protected by mud? The answer lies not in the pits themselves, but in the mind of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. But before we descend deeper into his world, before we contemplate the sheer weight of his vision, pause here, just for a moment, with these soldiers. Imagine standing beside them, not as an archaeologist or tourist, but as someone who has simply stumbled upon them. No sign, no guidebook, just the sudden, impossible presence of thousands of lifelike men, entombed in rank and file beneath your feet. Their eyes do not move, but they are not blind. Their mouths are closed, but they do not forget. Their arms hang or stretch, or curl in postures fixed forever. What were once tools, real bows, real spears, have rotted, but the men remain, sculpted in discipline, preserved in stillness, meant to remain unknown, now known. Let the image settle in your mind. One soldier, then another, then another. Their faces do not mirror each other. Their ears are not identical. Their torsos curve with subtle individuality. Some smile faintly, others grimace in stoic resolve. None of them speak, none of them move, but all of them remain, waiting, perhaps, for a master to return, or perhaps for no one at all. The sight expands. What began with 1 pit soon becomes 3. Thousands of figures emerge. Horses, too, bronze chariots with wheels long broken but shapes intact. Musicians, acrobats, courtiers, statues not only of warriors, but of service and spectacle, an entire court made from soil and fire. Not just soldiers, but a kingdom, all crafted to accompany a man beyond life. There are whispers of more, always whispers, a palace underground, a map of the stars painted on a ceiling beneath the hill, rivers of mercury, mechanisms set to destroy intruders, but the tomb itself, the emperor's own chamber, remains untouched. No shovel dares reach it, no camera has seen it. It waits, still. And while the world above moves on, cars pass on roads nearby. Children play in distant villages, the army beneath the ground does not shift. It watches, in formation, in patience, in silence. The moment of discovery may seem recent, 1974, in our calendar, but the silence stretches back to 210 BCE, over 2,000 years of darkness. Over 2,000 years of earth pressed above a vision no one spoke of openly. The farmers who uncovered it could not have imagined what they had touched. Let yourself rest beside them. You don't need to picture all 8,000, just a few. A handful of watchful figures, their armor etched with lines to suggest leather or metal. Their hands positioned as though still holding something that has long since vanished. You may feel, as many have, a strange kind of stillness in their presence. Not haunting, not cold, but unbothered. As if time itself pools here. As if centuries slow, curl, and sleep at their feet. And so we begin this third part of our journey. From Empress Wu's living court, to Qin Shi Huang's clay one. From scrolls and speech, to quiet formations under dust. From the rhythms of dynasty, to the stillness of what came before them all. Before Temps, before Han, even before the words were unified. There was this army, there was this emperor, and there was this mystery, buried by intention, and now slowly gently revealed. Let us stay here just a little longer. Let your thoughts soften, let the faces of the terracotta men drift past your mind. Let the silence grow wide, then fade, and when you're ready, we will descend further, into the world of the one who had them made. Imagine now a man at the edge of history, not only at the start of an empire, but at the end of his own certainty. His name was Ying Zhang, but history remembers him differently. First as Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of China, the unifier of warring states, the standardizer of scripts, of weights, of laws, of roads, a man who bound the fractured land into a single name, Qin. But beneath the weight of that title lay a deeper preoccupation, one not with the shape of his empire, but with the shape of what might come after. Not legacy, but immortality. Not memory, but permanence. The emperor would build not merely walls and cities, but a world that would follow him beyond the grave. In this world, there would be order. There would be loyalty. There would be power in this world. There would be no death. Or so he believed. The work began when he was still young. The plans drawn, the orders whispered. Beneath a hill in Lishon, laborers were sent not to build a palace above the earth, but one within it. Craftsmen from every corner of the empire were summoned, metalworkers from the south, sculptors from the north, masons who understood how stone cracked and held, potters whose hands had shaped vessels for generations, and slowly, beneath layers of command, they began to build what had never been built before, a city of clay for the emperor's soul, not a tomb of stillness, but one of movement, of warriors ready to march, of court servants standing by, of archers with heads turned as though scanning the horizon. Every detail mattered, every curl of hair, every curl of hair, every finger, every strap of armor, every face, and yet none would be seen by the living. The pits were dug, broad, rectangular trenches stretching in long rows beneath the hillside. Kilns were set up nearby, their bellies red with heat, their smoke curling upward into an unspoken sky. Every morning, the sculptors began again. Clay was mixed with sand and water, kneaded by bare feet and troughs until pliable. Hands pressed it into molds for torsos, arms, legs. Heads were shaped by hands, some softly, some with precision. Features carved in repetition, not too unique, but never identical. The faces had to be real enough to seem alive, but not so real that they could challenge the emperor's memory. They had to obey, even in death. The clay dried slowly, shaded under red awnings, fired in batches, lifted by teams, lowered into place, piece by piece, year by year, decade by decade. Some estimate over 700,000 workers were involved, not all at once, but over time, rotating crews, generations, men who never saw the finished pits, men who died placing the feet of a soldier who would never take a step. The army grew, though the emperor aged. He visited the site often quietly with few attendants, no ceremony, just a man observing his own imagined eternity. He did not speak much, or if he did, no one recorded it. The scrolls only say he was concerned with his legacy, but perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps he believed, as many did then, that death was not a final closing, but a transfer of domain. That emperors, in death, became lords of other planes, rulers, of echoes, of shadows, of whatever came next. And if that was so, then a ruler must still rule, an army must still guard, a court must still serve. In the next world, as in this one, and so the orders continued. More pits, more soldiers, more artisans. Those who made mistakes were dismissed. Those who excelled were allowed to continue. There are whispers, of course, of workers buried with their work, but no need to dwell. The emperor would not permit imperfection. He sought harmony in form, in posture, in silence. The kilns burned hotter, the tools grew finer. Archers were cast with their hair tied back, crouching. Cavalrymen stood with one arm raised, holding reins that had long since vanished. The armor bore rivets pressed into the clay, each one scored by hand, not quickly, not sloppily, with care. With endless repetition, one soldier, then another, and another, until the pits grew full, until the ground held legions of statues facing east toward lands the emperor had once conquered. But these were not idols. They were not gods. They were echoes of order, physical manifestations of loyalty, not just protection for the emperor in death, but a statement that power endures, that obedience remains, that even in the dark there is formation. Outside the pits, few spoke of it. The site was guarded, but not named. It was not part of public ritual. It was secret, but not hidden. It was known, but not seen. And in the center of it all, beneath the mound that still rests unopened, the emperor's true tomb was constructed. A chamber said to house not only his body, but a model of the empire itself. Rivers of mercury, celestial ceilings, traps, clocks, perhaps fictions, perhaps not. No one alive has seen it. No one living remembers who designed it. But still it waits, buried under lower soil and the weight of centuries. And the emperor Qin Shi Huang died at the age of 49, during a journey meant to find an elixir of life. His body was returned quietly, his tomb sealed, his name engraved. But his soldiers remained underground, unseen, not mourned, not honored, just standing. His vision, if we may call it that, was not poetic, not soft, it was absolute, not meant to inspire, but to command. He was not remembered kindly by all. He burned books, he buried scholars, he ruled with unity, but with fear, and yet, what he built in silence has endured beyond all who judged him. The army has stood longer than any general's campaign. It has outlasted the dynasty it served. It has survived floods, revolts, invasions, not because it is strong, but because it does not move, because it rests beneath the world, not demanding attention, but commanding it. And now, as you rest, imagine the quiet of those workshops, the rasp of carving tools against clay, the dull thud of shaped torsos being placed onto legs, the hum of voices, murmuring orders, the flicker of torchlight, and above it all, the Emperor watching, not smiling, not speaking, simply ensuring that eternity would be shaped in his name. There is something in their stillness, not merely the absence of breath or motion, but a silence sculpted so precisely it becomes its own presence. The terracotta army does not march, it does not gesture, it does not look to you or past you, it waits. That is all it has ever done. And within that waiting, a language is spoken not in words, but in posture, in folds of clay, in the shape of a brow. You do not need to strain to hear it. You only need to sit beside them, as one might sit beside old trees or stones warmed by the sun. They will tell you what they know, not by telling, but by being. Each figure, a soldier, but not only a soldier. Each one stands, kneels, grips, or gazes, in a manner that suggests they were shaped, not from imagination, but from memory, perhaps even from life. Perhaps, in the curling lock of hair above one ear, or in the delicate slant of a shoulder, a sculptor left a quiet echo of someone once known, a friend, a brother, a commander once admired, or perhaps a reflection of self pressed into imperial clay, where it might survive even if the man did not. There are thousands, rows that stretch in slow procession beneath the ground, and though they seem uniform at first glance, the eye finds difference, not just in position or rank, but in the tilt of heads, the width of palms, the curve of lips that never quite meet. No lips parted, no hands raised, no eyes turned. Each stands alone, even as they stand together. The foot soldiers are the most numerous infantrymen planted like stakes in long corridors. They wear short tunics and armored plates shaped to mimic leather or bronze. Some have topknots tied high, others low. Their hands are held out, some open, others formed to once grasp a wooden shaft, now long decayed. Imagine them before the rot, spears in hand, halberds shining, shields slung across the back, and yet still they do not move. Then come the archers. You'll find them kneeling, often in groups, positioned at the corners of formations. Their hair is tied tighter, more severe, their posture coiled, but serene, one knee pressed into the ground, one hand held to steady, the other to draw. But there are no strings, no arrows, only the intention of action, frozen mid-thought. This one looks down, that one forward, none make eye contact. Their purpose is focused, but eternal. No tension, just readiness, stretched across centuries. Charioteers stand behind clay horses, horses once painted, now pale with age. The chariots themselves are gone made of wood. They did not survive, but their impression lingers. A trio formation, one to steer, one to protect, one to strike. The charioteers' hands are arranged to grasp invisible reins, their eyes fixed ahead, though there is no road. You may imagine the sound of hooves on packed dirt, but here there is only silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of anticipation. A waiting so complete it has become its own form. And cavalrymen too, their armor more elaborate, their expressions more solemn. They stand beside saddled horses, also sculpted, ears perked, eyes wide, as if they too are not merely statues, but watchful participants. The bond between rider and beast is sculpted into their placement, the touch of hand to mane, the slight lean of body toward the animal's flank. Were they modeled on real men and real horses? Perhaps, or perhaps not. But someone shaped them to look as though they had known war, or had at least dreamed of it. Here is one. He stands with arms at ease. His face is rounded, serene. He wears no helmet. His armor is minimal. Was he new to the ranks, or trusted to patrol without protection? There is another. He kneels with a bow. The shape of his ear is detailed. The edge of his eyelids carved so faintly you might miss it. He was sculpted by someone with patience, with memory, perhaps with affection. This one waits, feet planted, mouth closed, eyes wide. You might imagine him listening, but there is nothing to hear. The level of detail is not accidental. The sculptors were not rushed. They worked in cycles, torsos, limbs, heads assembled from parts. But each face was given time, a template, yes, but always adjusted, a curve made deeper, a line softened, a frown added without instruction. It is not certain whether these were modeled after real people, but if they were not, then the sculptors possessed a memory so human, it birthed reality from clay alone. Some believe that the differences were deliberate, that a record of the Empire's peoples is encoded in the faces, northern features, southern cheekbones, western beards, a gallery of a nation, frozen beneath the ground. Others believe it was simply art designed to impress the emperor, or the gods, or both. And if you look closely, you will see signs of what once was color. Yes, these soldiers were not always this dusty brown. They were painted reds, blues, blacks, whites, skin tones varied, armor shimmered with lacquer, lips were tinted, eyes outlined. It is said the paint flaked off almost instantly upon excavation. Air met mineral, and the illusion cracked. But once, they stood in vibrant file, not unlike a living army beneath the sun, and yet, they were never meant to be seen by sun or sky. That is what remains most curious, most haunting, the detail, the care, the expression, all for an audience of none. Was it reverence? Was it fear? Was it devotion? Perhaps the sculptors did not know. Perhaps they worked with downcast eyes and hands worn to bone. Or perhaps they knew they were part of something larger. A creation not for now, but forever. A gift to a world beyond the veil. We do not know their names, not the soldiers, not the artists, not the supervisors. Only the emperor is named, Qin Shi Huang, but even he is silent now. The soldiers do not march, they do not speak, they do not age. They remain in place, as they were told, as they were shaped. Not one has turned since they were placed. Not one has looked up. They face east, toward the old enemies, perhaps, or toward the emperor's journey, or simply because east is where the sun begins. In this army no blood was shed, no battle fought, and yet, it is the most complete martial formation ever found. Not by power, but by persistence. No wind has scattered their ranks. No command has broken their file. They do not ask for glory. They do not need it. They are there still, and in being so, they remind us of something deeper, that the human urge to endure, to leave behind an echo, is not always loud. Sometimes it is made of clay, formed by hands now gone, standing in halls of earth, waiting, and if, in your quiet moments, you wonder who they were, perhaps you already know. Perhaps one of them wore the face of a man who once stood in sun and laughed, or a boy who dreamed of horses, or a woman who sculpted with fingers calloused by fire, or perhaps they were never real, and that is the secret, that they are us, only remembered in stillness. Beneath it all, beneath it still, the emperor sleeps, not merely in name, not in metaphor, but in the actual, physical world, buried beneath layers of earth, beyond reach, untouched for over 2,000 years. Qin Shi Huang's tomb, the heart of his immortal ambition, remains uninterrupted, and in that silence, in that deliberate unknowing, something powerful endures. It was known before the soldiers were uncovered, known before archaeologists began carefully brushing clay from faces unseen for ages, known because ancient texts whispered of Itov, a chamber deeper than any foundation, wider than any temple, where the emperor lies surrounded by stars, not stars above, but a replica of the cosmos carved into the ceiling of the tomb, set with pearls for planets and stones for constellations. Below him, rivers of mercury were said to flow, liquid metal coursing through artificial landscapes, representing the great rivers of China, the Yangtze and Yellow, curling eternally around his sarcophagus like dragons made of shimmering poison. Booby traps were rumored too, crossbows triggered by pressure, chambers sealed by mechanical stone, curses not in words but in weights that could crush the curious. All of it may be myth or may not. That is the mystery, and it remains just beneath our feet. The emperor's tomb was never forgotten. Even after his dynasty fell, even as later emperors rose, and ruled and died in their own palaces, the legend of his resting place persisted. The Han historian Sima Qian wrote of it, hundreds of years later. He recorded that construction began before Qin Shi Huang became emperor, when he was still a teenage king of Qin. He wrote of 700,000 laborers, some say prisoners, others conscripted artisans working night and day, building a world below this one. The burial mound was shaped like a hill, a perfect cone rising from the flat plains of Shanxi. Trees were planted to blend it with the landscape, but the hill is not natural. It is the cover of a mausoleum, one that has not yet been touched, and it remains closed, not because it is forgotten, but because it is feared. Feared not in superstition, but in care. The Chinese archaeological authorities have long resisted calls to dig, not because they cannot, but because they choose not to. Technology today may allow intrusion, but excavation brings destruction, and once opened, the contents will breathe modern air. Paint may peel, wood may decay, secrets may vanish the moment they are seen. So the soil guards, the mound watchers, and beneath it all, beneath it still, the emperor sleeps. What lies inside? That question pulls on the edge of human imagination. There may be treasure gold vessels, ritual jade, priceless scrolls, and weapons untouched by time. There may be sculptures unlike any above ground, perhaps dancers, perhaps servants, perhaps even horses formed of bronze, or perhaps there is nothing. Perhaps the emperor fooled us all, spreading false rumors to deter thieves. Perhaps the real secrets were stolen in the first generation after his death. Or perhaps the real wonder is not what lies within, but that it has not been disturbed. In a world where everything is exposed, where light is cast into every corner, here lies a place deliberately kept dark. Not out of fear, not out of taboo, but out of respect. You may ask why the tomb remains sealed when the terracotta army does not. But the soldiers stood outside the walls of the mausoleum. They were the guardians. They were the sentries. They stood in corridors, aligned in formation, ready for eternity. But the emperor lies further in, beyond them, beneath layers of earth and memory. To reach him would be to unmake the vision he left. To open the tomb would not only disturb the dead, but erase the silence they were given. And so he is left alone. Alone, as he once was in life. And yet, we know things without entering. Soil samples taken near the mound have shown unusually high concentrations of mercury. Scientific curiosity burns just below the surface. Imaging technologies have revealed chambers and passageways, a great central hall, smaller vaults to the sides, a symmetry that suggests not randomness, but design. Something waits, not by accident, but by intent, and this intent feels heavier than any command, heavier than any artifact. So we wait, we above, the world watches, and listens, and wonders. But no door is opened, no spade cuts the sealed soil. It is a strange pact between the living and the long dead, to preserve mystery, to honor patience, to accept that not all things are ours to know, and this restraint is rare. In most histories, curiosity breaks boundaries. In most stories, secrets are revealed. But here, the secret remains secret, and the silence holds. Perhaps one day it will change. Perhaps future generations will decide that technology is ready, that they can preserve as they uncover, that they can lift without breaking. But until then, the tomb sleeps, and beneath it all, beneath it still, the emperor remains. And what of the emperor? What of his mind that imagined such a place? He unified a fractured land. He burned books. He built walls. He drank mercury to live forever and died anyway. And in death, he built a realm that defied death. His empire did not last. His dynasty fell. But his tomb remains. And in that, perhaps he succeeded. Not in immortality of the body, but of presence. We remember his name. We remember his silence. We see his soldiers. We imagine his sleep. So we step back. We leave the tomb unopened. We let the mound be a mound. The army watches, but does not speak. The soil guards, but does not reveal. And beneath it all, beneath it still, the emperor sleeps. And so we leave behind the tombs, the silent soldiers, and the buried emperor. Their world, deep in the earth, remains untouched, a place of waiting and preserving. In the cool, quiet depths beneath Xianqin, Shi Huang's legacy rests, frozen, but still holding the weight of time. Beneath the lowest soil, beneath the untouched clay, the emperor sleeps, as he has for centuries, undisturbed by the winds of the world above. The army watches, but does not speak. The soil guards, but does not reveal. And beneath it all, beneath it still, the emperor remains. Yet, even as we leave that stillness, there is something profound in the silence of it, all a reminder that some legacies do not speak in the loud clamor of history's pages, but in the quiet endurance of time. For now, we step away from the quiet depth, from the tombs and the buried faces, and we turn toward something different. A world where the silence of the earth gives way to the rustle of silk, the shimmer of gold, and the whispers of winds that carry across vast deserts. Far from the tombs and the soldiers, in the arid expanse of Central Asia, where the horizon seems endless, and the dunes stretch to meet the sky, the world was different here. The dead did not sleep beneath the soil. Here the living carried the weight of power in the glint of jewelry and the smooth glide of silk. The air is dry, the sun unrelenting, and the desert winds whisper ancient secrets. But unlike the stillness of the emperor's tomb, here the world hums with activity, trade, movement, negotiation, and the pulse of an empire on the rise. Silk rustles in the desert wind, its rich fabric catching the sun, while caravans move slowly through the sand, their camels heavy with the weight of wealth and goods destined for lands far away. This is where the Silk Road begins, where the ties of empire, culture, and legacy are woven through a different kind of motion, not of statues waiting in silence, but of people and goods crossing the very earth that once held Qin Shi Huang's eternal vision. And so we shift. From the silence of buried stone, we now turn to the voices of merchants, diplomats, and aristocrats who walked along treacherous routes of the Silk Road. Theirs is a world where the value of a single bolt of silk could change the course of a kingdom, where the desert was not a barrier but a passage. Here, far from the tombs, the legacy of the empire continued not in secret, but in the open, with gold, danger, and diplomacy. As we leave behind the waiting soldiers and the unspoken histories buried beneath layers of earth, we now embark on a journey to another kind of wealth, one that is measured not in clay and stone, but in the shimmer of fabric and the weight of gold. The caravans continue to move, the winds continue to blow, and the world, once silent, begins to speak in a new tongue. Now let us step into this world where the desert winds meet the rustle of silk, and where the footsteps of aristocrats echo in the sands of time. This is the world of the Silk Road, where legacy is not just remembered, but lived. The desert stretches before us, an endless expanse of golden sand and muted earth. The horizon seems to dissolve into the sky, a pale blue that deepens and fades with the slow, unhurried movement of time. The air is dry almost to dry, as if the land itself has absorbed every drop of moisture and given nothing back. It feels empty, barren. And yet, beneath this surface stillness, there is a pulse, a rhythm, a secret thrum that runs through the very grains of sand, through the veins of the earth itself. It is the pulse of the Silk Road, the ancient trade route that carved its way through this desert like a lifeline, connecting the farthest corners of east and west, and carrying with it not just goods, but history. The desert, in all its vastness and emptiness, has always been a boundary, a line that separates worlds, that divides cultures, that separates the known from the unknown. And yet, this same desert has also been a passage, a bridge between civilizations, a place where the winds of change have blown the spices, silks, and stories of distant lands across vast stretches of land and time. It is here, in this space of silence and isolation, that we find not just the harshness of the terrain, but the quiet, steady movement of caravans, camel after camel, loaded with riches, carrying merchants, aristocrats, and ambassadors whose very lives depended on the trade that passed through this inhospitable land. Picture the scene. A caravan moves slowly across the sand, its camels plodding with rhythmic grace. The desert sun casts a long golden light across the dunes, softening the sharp edges of the world. The air shimmers with heat, and the sounds of the caravan rise in the stillness. Low calls of merchants haggling, the distant hum of the camels' footsteps, the creak of leather straps as they are adjusted. The traders, wrapped in loose, flowing robes, move like shadows in the heat, their faces covered by scarves to shield themselves from the sun. There is a hum, a murmur, a kind of quiet energy that fills the space between them. But the desert itself, the land that stretches endlessly in every direction, is not kind to those who wander without purpose. It is both an obstacle and an opportunity. It demands respect, for the dunes shift and the sun burns, but it also offers the promise of connection. The trade that passed through this arid wilderness was not merely a transaction of goods, but a negotiation of cultures, a blending of worlds. And at the heart of it all, in the midst of the wind and the dust, stood the aristocrats, men and women who controlled the flow of goods and who understood that the desert was not something to be conquered, but something to be navigated, to be worked with. As these aristocrats moved through the desert, they carried with them not just the wealth of their empires, but the weight of diplomacy, the intricacies of power, and the delicate balance of cultural exchange. Silk, gold, spices, and porcelain flowed from China to Rome. Glass, wool, and wine made their way from the west to the east. But these goods were not simply traded for the sake of commerce. They were symbols of influence, of status, of alliances. To control the Silk Road was to control not just trade, but the very connections between the great civilizations of the world, and it was the aristocrats who held that power in their hands, whose influence reached beyond the borders of their cities, whose fortunes were tied not only to the wealth they accumulated, but to the bridges they built between cultures. In the desert, The caravan is not just a means of transportation. It is a moving microcosm of a world that exists beyond the horizon. The caravans carried with them not only the physical goods of silk and spices, but ideas, philosophies, and technologies. Along the Silk Road, knowledge and culture moved as freely as the precious fabrics and valuable metals. It was here that the East met the West, where Buddhism made its way from India to China, where Persian art influenced Chinese porcelain, and where Roman glass and Egyptian papyrus were found in the hands of merchants in Central Asia. The caravans did not travel in isolation. They were part of a much larger network, one that connected vast empires and sprawling kingdoms across continents. The aristocrats who managed the trade routes had to navigate not only the physical dangers of the desert, but the political complexities of the many kingdoms that sat along the Silk Road. The desert was a place of both danger and opportunity where bandits lurked on the edges, waiting for a caravan to pass by, and where empires vied for control of strategic trade posts and city-states that acted as waypoints on the journey. The desert's silence contrasted sharply with the bustling energy of the trade that passed through it. In the cities that dotted the deserts, Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgoda, sound of merchants haggling, the clink of gold coins, and the shuffling of foot traffic filled the air. These cities were not just stopping points for caravans. They were centers of culture, learning, and diplomacy. Here, the aristocrats gathered, often behind closed doors, to make deals, broker alliances, and negotiate the terms of the trade that would shape the future of entire empires. It is within these cities, and within the caravans that moved between them, that the true power of the Silk Road lay. The aristocrats who controlled the flow of goods across this vast and dangerous landscape were not simply traders, they were diplomats, strategists, and negotiators. They understood that trade was not just about the exchange of material goods, but the exchange of culture, influence, and political power. They wielded their wealth not with the force of armies, but with the subtlety of alliances and the art of negotiation. As the caravan moves across the desert, the sun setting behind the dunes, the merchants settle in for the night, the fires are lit, and the smoke rises in soft curls into the cooling air. The sound of laughter and conversation fills the space around the camp. But even here, in the warmth of the firelight, there is a sense of impermanence. The desert is never far away, its vastness looming just beyond the edge of the firelight, and so the traders, the aristocrats, and the diplomats remain vigilant, understanding that the next journey, the next deal, the next exchange, could bring both fortune and danger. The desert is both a boundary and a passage, a place where worlds collide and cultures merge. And as we sit by the fire with the caravan, watching the embers glow softly in the night, we realize that the desert is not just an obstacle to be overcome. It is the very heart of the Silk Road, the silent, ever-present thread that connects east and west, the life-giving artery that sustains the flow of goods, power, and influence. And in this vast, empty space, where sand meets sky, the aristocrats of the Silk Road move quietly, their power not in noise, but in the steady movement of trade, diplomacy, and legacy. Far from the sand-drenched roads of the desert, where the horizon blurs beneath the oppressive weight of heat and the dust of caravans, there exists a different world. It is a world of shaded courtyards, marble floors, and delicately woven silk. The desert, in its silent expanse, may stretch endlessly across the land, but it has only ever been a passage. For those who control the trade that moves along its arteries, the destination is not just the city gates, but the palace's rooms where the richness of the earth is stored, displayed, and celebrated. In the grand courts of Central Asia, Persia, and China, the lives of the aristocrats are lived in luxury, a stark contrast to the harsh journey through which their wealth was carried. These aristocrats, men and women alike, were not mere participants in the trade. They were its architects, the ones who shaped the flow of silk and spices, who determined the alliances and marriages that ensured wealth and status. Their homes, their clothing, and their very lives were imbued with a power that came from controlling such a vital exchange. And in this world of opulence, the harsh desert winds were but a distant whisper. In these palaces, the very air is thick with wealth. The walls are adorned with gold-threaded tapestries, woven by hands that have never known the weight of travel or the dust of the road. The floors are polished marble or intricately patterned tiles, reflecting the soft glow of oil lamps. The furniture is elegant but purposeful, cushioned chairs draped in velvet, lacquered tables gleaming under the light. These rooms are not merely places for rest, they are sanctuaries for power. It is here that the aristocrats, guarded by eunuchs and surrounded by courtiers, hold council, make decisions, and negotiate the terms of trade that will shape the empire. The wealth of the Silk Road aristocrats is not merely in their gold and jewels, though those too are plenty. Their clothing alone speaks volumes. Robes of rich silk, dyed in the deepest shades of indigo and crimson, embroidered with delicate patterns that tell the stories of far off lands. Fabrics that once made their way through the deserts and mountains, carried by the caravans of traders who moved from China to the Mediterranean, are now fashioned into garments that speak not only of status, but of history. Gold-threaded patterns wind through the folds of their sleeves, intricate designs that symbolize wealth and refinement, and the jewels large polished opals from Persia, jade pendants from China, and emerald rings from India are not simply ornaments, but representations of connections, each one a gift, an alliance, a transaction that helped elevate them from their humble beginnings to the heights of aristocracy. Within their palaces, these aristocrats are not just wealthy, they are rulers in their own right. Power, in their world, is not measured in the size of armies, but in the influence they wield over trade and diplomacy. The Silk Road is as much about control of the flow of goods, as it is about the relationships that ensure their passage. Silk, gold, spices, and porcelain, they are not just commodities, they are tools of power, keys that unlock doors to deeper influence. And so, these aristocrats spend their days in negotiation, in trade, in quiet yet vital diplomacy. They are not simply collecting goods, they are collecting power. Through alliances forged in cities along the Silk Road, they bind distant empires to their will. The political world of these aristocrats is one of delicate balance. Marriages are not simply unions of love, but of alliance, of mutual benefit. The marriage of a daughter to a foreign prince is not an emotional affair, but a strategic move-on exchange that can shift the balance of power in favor of one house over another. The sending of a caravan laden with silk and gold to a distant kingdom is not merely for commerce, it is a political gesture, a sign of goodwill, or perhaps of a more subtle expectation. As these aristocrats live within the walls of their palaces, where the air is cool, and the chambers are filled with the scent of incense and perfume, it is easy to forget the brutal reality of the desert beyond. The dust, the wind, the unbearable heat, all of it seems a distant memory, far removed from the soft rustling of silk that fills their courts. And yet, the truth is that these aristocrats, for all their wealth and refinement, are bound to the very desert that they once traversed. Their wealth, their power, their influence, all of it was earned through the labor of those who crossed the desert, those who faced the dangers of bandits and treacherous terrain, those who brought silk from the east to the west, and vice versa. The aristocrats themselves may never have felt the sting of the sun or the weight of the sand beneath their feet, but they owe everything they have to those who did. There is, perhaps, a certain isolation in their wealth. The merchants and traders who move the goods through the desert are often viewed with suspicion by the aristocracy, even though they are the ones who make that wealth possible. In the quiet of their palaces, surrounded by luxury and power, the aristocrats may feel disconnected from the realities of the trade they depend on. They may never truly understand the struggle that those who traverse the desert face, how each journey is fraught with danger, how each trade is a gamble, how each deal can mean the difference between survival and ruin. And yet, despite this isolation, there is a deep connection. The silk that rustles in the air of the palace, the gold that glimmers in the dim light, and the porcelain that sits on the delicate tables, they all come from the desert. They are reminders of the trade routes that stretch far across the world, and of the empires that were built, not on military conquest, but on the careful, quiet control of commerce. The merchants who travel the Silk Road may face hardship and danger, but they are, in a sense, the silent architects of empire. They make possible the world in which the aristocrats live, where power is measured not by the number of soldiers one commands, but by the flow of goods one controls. And so, in their palaces, the aristocrats live in the luxury of their wealth, their silk and gold, but also in the awareness that this wealth is fleeting, that it is the product of constant negotiation, of delicate diplomacy. They are not the kings and queens of the desert, but they are the rulers of the world that the desert nourishes. And as they sit in their chambers, listening to the soft murmur of conversation, the faint sound of silk rustling in the wind, they know, perhaps only in the quietest part of their minds, that their power is built on a foundation as shifting as the sands outside. The desert, in all its quiet vastness, has shaped them, and in return they shape the world that surrounds them. To move along the Silk Road is to navigate not just miles of open desert or endless stretches of winding paths, but to step carefully through the crossroads of civilizations. Each city, each oasis, each fortress stood as a vital link in a chain stretching from the palaces of China to the distant shores of the Mediterranean. In this vast, sweeping geography of exchange. The Silk Road was more than just a route, it was a gateway, a passage where the ebb and flow of goods, cultures, and power met and intertwined. For the aristocrats who held sway over these key points, controlling these passages was not just a matter of wealth, it was a matter of survival and of influence. The great trade routes of the Silk Road were not mere highways, they were vital arteries of empire, and to control them was to control the pulse of history itself. Cities like Shan, Samarkand, and Bukhara were not just trading posts, they were hubs of culture, power, and wealth. Shan, as the starting point of the Silk Road in China, was the grand gateway to the east, the city where silk, tea, and jade began their journey westward. Samarkand, nestled at the crossroads of Central Asia, flourished as a melting pot of ideas, where Persian, Turkic, and Indian influences blended, creating a hub for scholars, merchants, and diplomats alike. And Bukhara, known as the Pearl of the East, sat strategically in the middle of the trade route between China and the West, holding the key to the exchange of luxury goods, and with it the power to influence entire empires. These cities, though distant from one another, were united by their position on the Silk Road. Their streets hummed with life, filled with the sounds of merchants haggling, horses clopping, and the faintest echo of camel bells. But beneath this seemingly bustling energy, there was a quieter, more powerful undercurrent diplomacy. For the aristocrats who ruled over these hubs, the wealth that flowed through them came not just from trade, but from the delicate balance of power, negotiation, and sometimes silent agreements. The movement of goods across these trade routes was not seamless. It was fraught with challenges, not just geographical barriers like mountains and deserts, but political ones as well. The Silk Road was a space of constant flux, with changing empires, shifting alliances, and the unpredictable presence of nomadic tribes. These nomads, often depicted in Western imagination as wild, untamed riders of the steppe, were both trade partners and threats. They were the ones who brought goods across the vast empty spaces, yet they were also the ones who could raid the very caravans that depended on those routes for survival. Nomadic tribes such as the Xiongnu Turks and Mongols were often a challenge for the aristocrats, who sought to maintain control over the Silk Road. They were skilled in warfare and had no permanent homes to defend. They roamed freely across the vast steppes and deserts, making alliances when it suited them, but breaking them when it no longer served their interests. In the world of the aristocrats, the nomads were both a crucial part of the trade network and a constant threat to their wealth. To control the Silk Road, they had to navigate the delicate art of negotiation, ensuring that the nomads would remain trade partners, rather than adversaries. The relationship between the aristocrats and these nomadic tribes was often built on mutual necessity. The nomads required the goods brought by the caravan, silk, spices, and precious metals, but the aristocrats needed the nomads to ensure safe passage through the vast desert and mountain ranges. The aristocrats, therefore, engaged in a subtle form of diplomacy, carefully balancing the promise of wealth with the threat of force. Gifts were exchanged, alliances were formed, and at times, military might was deployed, but always, diplomacy was the tool of choice. Trade, however, was never just about goods. It was about power. It was about ideas. The Silk Road was a conduit for the exchange of philosophies, religions, and technologies that shaped the course of civilizations. The aristocrats, though often seen as detached from the world of ordinary trade, were at the heart of this exchange. They were the ones who forged the diplomatic ties that allowed Buddhism to travel from India to China, that allowed Persian art to influence Chinese porcelain, that brought Greek and Roman ideas into the heart of Central Asia. In this way, trade was not just material, it was cultural, it was ideological, it was a means of shaping entire civilizations, and this is where the aristocrats truly held their power. They were not merely wealthy because they controlled the flow of silk or gold. They were powerful because they controlled the flow of culture, of knowledge. They understood that the exchange of goods was intertwined with the exchange of ideas. By controlling the flow of trade, they also controlled the flow of intellectual capital. The Silk Road was, in essence, a pathway of cultural diplomacy, and the aristocrats were its ambassadors. Imagine now, as you settle into this world, the scent of spices in the air, the faint sound of hooves echoing across the cobblestone streets, the rustle of fine silk as it shifts in the cool evening breeze. In these courts and palaces, the aristocrats are not merely overseeing trade, they are shaping the course of history. Each negotiation, each alliance, each trade deal is a step in the dance of empire building. There are no loud proclamations, no grand speeches, there are only quiet conversations, whispered deals, and the soft glint of gold in the candlelight. But in this world of wealth and power, there is an isolation that comes with it. The aristocrats, though surrounded by luxury, are distanced from the everyday struggles of those who make the trade possible. They live in a world where silk rustles in the wind, where gold glimmers in the dim light, and where deals are struck quietly, away from the eyes of the world. But for all their influence, they are separate from the world they control. Their palaces are fortresses safe, secure, and distant. The people they rule may move across the Silk Road with purpose, but the aristocrats do not. They remain where they are, watching, waiting, but never truly engaged in the rhythm of the trade. This isolation of power is both a privilege and a burden. It allows them to exert influence over vast stretches of land and people, but it also keeps them apart. They are surrounded by wealth, but they are not of the world they have built, and in that silence, that distance, there is a quiet tension. For all their wealth, for all their power, the aristocrats know that their control is fragile. The caravan can be stopped. The trade can be interrupted. The nomads can turn against them, and with the desert stretching endlessly around them, the isolation of their palaces becomes all the more profound. There in the quiet, they are left to ponder the delicate balance of power, always shifting, always uncertain. And so, in the cool, shadowed halls of their palaces, the aristocrats sit. The desert winds may howl outside, but within these walls, all is calm. They move with purpose, but with quiet grace. The world outside may be harsh, but in here, they are the masters. Their power flows not through military might, but through trade, diplomacy, and culture. And yet, they are not immune to the world beyond their walls. For all their wealth, for all their status, they are bound by the same forces of time, trade, and change that shape the rest of the world. Silk, the very word seems to echo with elegance, with wealth, with the promise of something rare and refined. It is a material that has captured the human imagination for thousands of years, woven not just into the fabric of clothing, but into the very fabric of civilizations. For those who controlled the production and trade of silk, it was not just a commodity, it was a means of power. The history of the Silk Road cannot be told without considering the central role that silk played, for it was not merely a luxury item. It was a tool of diplomacy, a symbol of status, and a key to the economic and political influence that rippled outward from the heart of China and into the world. In the cool, shaded courtyards of China's ancient capitals, the silk trade began long before it reached the bustling markets of Rome or the gilded palaces of Persia. It began with a small, quiet creature, the silkworm. This humble insect, whose delicate threads would one day change the course of history, begins its life with a singular purpose: to spin. Slowly, it weaves a cocoon from its own secretion, spinning fine, smooth threads that, when collected and unraveled, reveal a fabric unlike any other. Soft, lustrous, and delicate, the silken thread is prized for its strength and beauty. Imagine the early silk-making process as it unfolded in the tranquil, secretive chambers of Chinese artisans. The silkworms, raised in controlled environments, feed on mulberry leaves and grow plump and slow. The process is precise, methodical, and deeply woven into Chinese culture. From the silkworm's tiny bodies, threads are harvested, stretched, and spun into a fine, gleaming fabric. The silk is then dyed in colors that seem to shimmer with life: deep indigo, vibrant reds, rich yellows, each color more precious than gold. The fabric is meticulously woven by hand, creating intricate patterns that represent not only artistic mastery but spiritual significance. Silk, in ancient China, was not just a fabric, it was a treasure, a gift from the gods themselves. The Chinese revered silk as a symbol of the natural order and harmony, and it was tied to religious and cultural practices. It was used in court ceremonies, in rituals to honor the ancestors, and in the lavish clothing of the emperor and his court. To wear silk was to wear a symbol of divine favor, of imperial power, and of the cultural refinement that had made China a civilization unlike any other. And so, from the silkworm's cocoon to the imperial robes, silk became more than a commodity. It became the heart of the empire's identity, its most precious treasure, and its greatest export. As the trade routes stretched westward, crossing deserts and mountains, silk traveled with them. Its journey was not just a passage of goods, but the movement of culture itself. For those who controlled the silk trade, power was not only measured in the wealth they accumulated, but in the influence they wielded over distant lands. The very act of controlling silk meant controlling the flow of wealth not just in material terms, but in the intangible currency of diplomacy. In the courts of Persia, Rome, India, and the Byzantine Empire, silk was more than just an item for sale. It was a symbol of alliance, of peace, of respect. Aristocrats, kings, and emperors exchanged bolts of silk as gifts, not merely as trade goods, but as a way to cement relationships and demonstrate mutual admiration. A gift of silk was often a political gesture, one ruler sending silk to another as a sign of friendship, a declaration of peace, or an invitation to negotiate. The value of silk was not merely in its cost, but in what it represented, a bridge between cultures, a thread woven between nations that transcended borders and boundaries. The cultural diplomacy of silk extended beyond royal exchanges. Silk's role in court life was immeasurable. In China, it was woven into the fabric of every aspect of imperial life. The emperor and his court were draped in the finest silks, a visible symbol of their status and power. But silk's cultural significance reached beyond clothing. It was used in court ceremonies, in the sacred rituals that bound the emperor to the heavens and the people to their ruler. The emperor's robes, often intricately designed and embroidered with gold and silk threads, symbolized not only his connection to the divine but his control over the vast empire he ruled. For the aristocrats who controlled the Silk Road, silk became both a symbol and a means of maintaining their power. The production of silk, initially a closely guarded secret in China, eventually spread to the West. But even as silk became a commodity traded across vast distances, it never lost its significance. It remained a symbol of power, a fabric that connected not only the great empires of the East and West, but the aristocrats who ruled them. As silk moved across the Silk Road, it carried with it not just wealth, but cultural significance. From the courtiers of Persia to the elite of Rome, everyone coveted silk not just for its beauty, but for the prestige it conferred. The aristocrats who controlled its flow knew this well. They understood that to possess silk was to possess not just a commodity, but a symbol of power. And to control the silk trade was to control a cultural and economic empire. Silk was not just a luxury good, it was the lifeblood of diplomacy. Aristocrats understood that the gift of silk was more than just an exchange of material wealth. It was a gesture of trust, an offering of peace, a sign of a relationship well formed. When rulers sent silk to one another, they sent not just fabric, but a promise of cooperation, a promise of mutual respect, a promise of strength. This was the power of silk. It wove not only the fabric of empires, but the fabric of relationships. Its thread was tied not just to trade, but to the bonds between kings, emperors, and aristocrats. It was a commodity that transcended the physical, becoming a cultural treasure and object that defined the identities of those who controlled it. Silk was power, in its purest form. In the quiet chambers of their palaces, the aristocrats would have felt the weight of this power every time they touched a bolt of silk, every time they draped it over their shoulders or presented it as a gift. It was not just the luxury of the fabric, but the luxury of influence. The weight of history was woven into every fiber, and yet, for all its beauty, silk was also a reminder of the world beyond the palace gates, beyond the walls of wealth and refinement. For those who wore it, silk was a constant reminder of the delicate balance of power that held their world together. The desert winds still blew outside their doors, carrying with them the sounds of caravans, of traders, of the ever-present danger of losing the control they held so tightly. But for now, within the quiet walls of their courts, the aristocrats could rest, for they knew that in the delicate weave of silk, in the glimmer of gold, and in the quiet diplomacy of the Silk Road, they held the thread of history itself. As we shift from the opulent palaces and silk-laden courts of the aristocrats, we are reminded that even within the safety of their golden walls, there was a world of danger and ever-present tension between wealth and the threat of loss, between influence and the constant need to protect that power. While the aristocrats who controlled the flow of goods along the Silk Road seemed untouchable in their luxurious residences, the truth was that their wealth was never secure. To walk the road of power was not only to live in abundance, but to constantly balance on the knife's edge of diplomacy and threat. The desert, with all its silence and mystery, held within it not just the promise of wealth but the ever-present reality of danger. The caravans that moved across the vast expanse of sand carried not only goods but the weight of potential threats. Bandits roamed the roads, driven by the prospect of wealth that moved so freely across them. Rival factions sought to control the routes, turning once peaceful passages into contested battlegrounds. The aristocrats, however, could not afford to rely solely on military might or force to protect their wealth. Their power came not only from the goods they controlled, but from the delicate and often invisible art of diplomacy. Diplomacy, in this context, was not just a formal exchange of words or treaties. It was a living, breathing practice, woven into every aspect of aristocratic life. It was the subtle negotiations, the quiet alliances, the quiet power exercised through the act of maintaining relationships. These aristocrats were not warriors in the traditional sense. They wielded no swords. Instead, they wielded influence. Through marriage alliances, trade deals, and personal negotiations, they navigated the complex web of rivalries and tensions that defined the Silk Road. They knew that strength was often best expressed not through force, but through the quiet, steady hand of diplomacy, negotiating, influencing, and building connections that would protect their wealth and power. The art of diplomacy was most clearly seen in the way these aristocrats interacted with one another. While they may have ruled vast regions, their empires were never monolithic. They did not control the entire Silk Road. Instead, they controlled key points, strategic cities, trade routes, and markets, and, in order to maintain their power, they had to negotiate with the rulers of neighboring territories, tribes, and kingdoms. They did not simply sit in their palaces and wait for trade to come to them. They traveled, they met, they exchanged gifts, crafted agreements, and entered into alliances that secured their positions of power. These negotiations were conducted in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of their people, but they were the lifeblood of aristocratic rule. In the courts of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Chang'an, ambassadors would meet quietly in lavish chambers adorned with silk and gold. The conversations were often subtle, laced with meanings not easily understood by outsiders. A simple exchange of silk or porcelain could be laden with political significance, an offer of military support, a promise of protection for trade routes, a nod toward future alliances. For the aristocrats, these moments were not just about wealth. They were about control over relationships, over the flow of goods, and over the political landscape that spanned thousands of miles. Diplomacy was, at its core, a means of consolidating and protecting their position. But as much as diplomacy was the aristocrats' weapon of choice, they were not immune to the dangers that lurked beyond their courtly walls. Bandits roamed the deserts and mountains, preying on the caravans that carried valuable goods. The roads were not safe, and the aristocrats knew it. In fact, their wealth and power made them even more vulnerable. They were not just targets for the bandits, they were also targets for rival aristocrats, for rulers seeking to expand their own domains. To be rich and powerful on the Silk Road was to invite jealousy and greed, and the aristocrats had to constantly guard their wealth and influence. To protect their caravans, aristocrats often relied on a mix of diplomacy and force. They would hire mercenaries to guard their goods, forging alliances with powerful military factions or even nomadic tribes who could ensure the safe passage of their precious wares. But these alliances were not without their own complexities. The nomads, though essential for the protection of the caravans, were not always reliable. Their loyalty could be fickle, and their influence over the trade routes could be unpredictable. At times, the aristocrats were forced to negotiate directly with these nomadic tribes, offering gifts or promises in exchange for protection. The bandits, too, were often a source of concern. While they may have posed a threat to the wealth of the aristocrats, they also held power over the trade routes, and the aristocrats had to negotiate with them as well. This was no simple matter of force or violence. The aristocrats had to find ways to work with these forces, whether by offering tribute, making concessions, or striking temporary peace agreements. But beyond the practical matters of protecting trade routes and securing wealth, the Silk Road aristocrats had to contend with the deeper, more philosophical role of diplomacy. Their wealth was not simply measured by the goods they controlled or the military alliances they could broker. It was measured by the ideas they could spread, by the cultural influence they could exert. The Silk Road was not just a trade route for material goods, it was a conduit for the exchange of ideas, art, and religion. As goods moved from east to west and west to east, so too did philosophies, beliefs, and innovations. For the aristocrats, controlling the flow of ideas was as important as controlling the flow of silk or gold. They understood that the exchange of ideas, the ability to shape culture, was a tool as powerful as any weapon. In their courts, the aristocrats hosted scholars, poets, and artists who brought with them the stories, philosophies, and cultural practices of distant lands. The aristocrats didn't just negotiate in material wealth, they negotiated in the exchange of knowledge. Buddhism, for example, traveled from India to China, carried not only by monks but by aristocrats, who saw the religion's value as a way to solidify their power. Similarly, Persian art and ideas influenced the art of Central Asia and China. As aristocrats recognized the cultural weight that came with such exchanges, To be seen as a patron of knowledge, a supporter of the arts, or a proponent of a new religion was to solidify one's status as a leader not only in wealth, but in cultural influence. And so, despite their wealth, despite the opulence of their palaces and courts, the aristocrats of the Silk Road were never truly safe. They were always balancing on the edge of conflict, negotiating between the demands of trade, the threats of bandits, and the need for diplomatic power. They understood that their wealth could vanish as quickly as it came, that alliances could shift, and that their influence depended not just on the goods they controlled, but on the relationships they maintained. But within the walls of their palaces, amid the soft rustling of silk and the clink of gold, they held the reins of history in their hands. They were not merely rulers of land and goods, they were masters of influence, of culture, of trade. They were the architects of empires, not through the force of armies, but through the delicate dance of diplomacy and power. The desert winds blow, carrying echoes of a past now distant, yet ever present in the fabric of culture, of wealth, of connection. The caravans that once wound their way across the vast expanse of the Silk Road are long gone. Their goods scattered, their routes forgotten by time. The silk, the gold, the porcelain, these material treasures have found new homes in museums and collections, their significance now reduced to relics of a bygone era. But while the goods of the Silk Road may have disappeared, the influence of those who shaped its course, the aristocrats who navigated its complexities, who saw not just trade but the weaving of empires, lingers still. These aristocrats who moved through the palaces of Samarkand and the courts of Chang'an, whose wealth and power were built on the exchange of silk and spices, are long gone, yet their legacy is woven into the very fabric of our modern world, not through their riches but through the connections they forged and the cultures they intertwined. For the Silk Road was never just a route of material exchange, it was a conduit for the flow of ideas, philosophies, and artistic expression that transformed not only the regions it passed through but the world itself. The Silk Road was a bridge, a thin, winding thread connecting East and West, drawing together the disparate cultures of China, Persia, India, Greece, and Rome. It was through the work of the aristocrats, diplomats, traders, and rulers that this bridge was not only built but strengthened over time. These individuals understood that their power did not lie solely in the wealth they accumulated, but in the networks they created, the bonds they established. They forged alliances across empires, and in doing so, they laid the groundwork for the exchange of ideas that would shape the future. The influence of the Silk Road can be seen in the art, language, and philosophy that emerged from this confluence of cultures. The art of the Silk Road was never static, it was always evolving, shaped by the flow of ideas across borders. From the intricate designs of Chinese porcelain to the delicate, flowing lines of Persian carpets, the Silk Road artists blended influences from far-flung lands, creating works that were both beautiful and meaningful. These artistic traditions, once the domain of aristocrats who could afford such luxuries, have influenced cultures all over the world, leaving behind a lasting legacy that transcends time and geography. In language, too, the Silk Road's impact is still felt. The exchange of words, of scripts, of philosophies was as vital as the exchange of goods. Sanskrit spread eastward, making its way to China, where it influenced the development of Buddhist texts. In turn, Chinese characters made their way westward, influencing the development of written languages in Central Asia and Persia. The very idea of a universal script, one that could bridge linguistic divides, was born from the need to communicate across cultures. This is a legacy of the Silk Road that persists today. As the modern world continues to engage in cross-cultural communication through the written word, philosophy and religion, too, traveled along the Silk Road. Buddhism, which began as a small movement in India, spread across Central Asia, China, and beyond, carried by travelers, merchants, and missionaries. The aristocrats who ruled along the Silk Road were often patrons of religious ideas, supporting the spread of new beliefs as a way to solidify their power and influence. In the courts of the great cities, where silk was traded for gold and incense burned in golden urns, new philosophies were discussed, adopted, and adapted. The ideas that flowed from east to west and west to east shaped the intellectual landscapes of civilizations, leaving an enduring mark on the ways we think about religion, culture, and the world around us. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Silk Road is the way it brought cultures together, weaving a tapestry of human connection that continues to resonate today. The aristocrats who navigated the complex networks of the Silk Road may have been driven by wealth and power, but in doing so, they helped to create a world that was more interconnected than ever before. They built bridges, literal and figurative, between civilizations that might otherwise never have met. and in doing so, they laid the foundations for the world we live in now. The wealth of the Silk Road aristocrats was not just measured in gold, but in the lasting impact they had on the world's cultural and intellectual development. The cities they built, the goods they traded, and the ideas they exchanged created a ripple effect that continues to be felt today. The Silk Road was not just a highway for merchants and traders, it was a conduit for the flow of human knowledge, art, and culture. And in the quiet moments of reflection, we can trace the legacy of those who moved along it: the aristocrats, the diplomats, the merchants who shaped the world in ways we are still discovering. As the centuries have passed, the Silk Road's physical roots may have faded into the background, but its cultural impact is ever present. The influence of the Silk Road aristocrats can be seen in the global exchange of ideas that continues to shape our modern world. The global markets we see today, with their complex networks of trade and negotiation, owe much to the practices and philosophies developed along the Silk Road. The art and culture that emerged from the interaction of East and West continued to influence modern design, fashion, and art, and the philosophical ideas that were exchanged, ideas about religion, governance, and human nature, continued to shape the way we think and live. In many ways, the legacy of the Silk Road aristocrats is a legacy of connection. They were the architects of a world where cultures could meet, exchange, and learn from one another. Their wealth may have come from material goods, but their true power came from their ability to bring disparate peoples together, to create a shared space of knowledge, trade, and culture. The desert winds may blow across the remnants of their roots, but the legacy of their connections is still felt today, in every corner of the globe. As you rest now, listening to the soft hum of history, remember that the silk you see, the ideas you hear, the cultures you encounter, they are all threads of a tapestry woven long ago. The aristocrats of the Silk Road may no longer walk among us, but their influence endures, quietly, in the fabric of our world. As the winds of time carry us away from the bustling courts of aristocrats and the winding paths of the Silk Road, we return once again to the silence. The desert, vast and endless, stretches beneath an unbroken sky, an ever-present reminder of the world we have traveled through. The winds continue to blow, carrying with them whispers of the past, the silent echoes of empires that rose and fell, and in the stillness, in the quiet that remains, we find the legacy of those who shaped the Silk Road, the aristocrats whose power, whose wealth, and whose influence still ripple through the fabric of our modern world. In their palaces, the aristocrats once sat, surrounded by the wealth of empire, silk, gold, and porcelain, all the treasures of the world's trade flowing through their hands. Yet, despite the luxury, there was always a shadow of silence. The desert winds that swept through the Silk Road never stopped blowing. They were the constant reminder that even the wealthiest could not escape the forces of time and change. The caravans that carried riches to and from the great cities eventually stopped moving. The goods that once flowed freely now rest in museums, relics of an age gone by. But the influence of those who controlled the Silk Road, who understood the delicate balance of diplomacy, trade, and culture, endures. In the silence of the desert, the ghosts of these aristocrats remain, like the terracotta soldiers still, yet ever moving in the memories of those who built them. They stand as a testament to a time when the world was connected by more than just roads. The statues, silent and unmoving beneath the earth, were once crafted by hands that labored in secrecy, creating a legacy that has lasted millennia. And just as the soldiers frozen in place remind us of the emperor's power, the aristocrats of the Silk Road stand as reminders of the connections they made, the relationships they forged, and the cultural bridges they built across continents. As we reflect on the legacy of these aristocrats, it becomes clear that their wealth was never the end goal. The true power they wielded came not from the gold they amassed or the silk they traded, but from the relationships they built. They understood that wealth, while important, was fleeting, but influenced the power to shape the world, to forge connections, to bring together different cultures, was eternal. And so, they used their wealth to create bonds. They used diplomacy to tie together distant lands, ensuring that the flow of goods, of ideas, and of culture would continue, long after they were gone. The Silk Road was never just about trade, it was about people. It was about cultures meeting and exchanging, about ideas flowing from east to west and back again. It was about the aristocrats who knew that the goods they traded, silk, spices, porcelain, and more, were only part of the story. The true legacy of the Silk Road lies in the exchanges that occurred alongside those goods. The philosophies, the religions, the art, all of these were carried across the trade routes, just as the goods were, And the aristocrats, with their delicate negotiations and subtle diplomacy, were the architects of this cultural exchange. The legacy of the Silk Road aristocrats is woven into the very fabric of our modern world. The goods they traded, the silk, the gold, the porcelain, may have disappeared, but their influence lives on. The art, the ideas, and the philosophies that traveled along the Silk Road continue to shape the cultures of today. From the architecture that blends Eastern and Western influences, to the religions that spread along these ancient routes, to the art that still echoes the designs of the past, the legacy of the Silk Road is all around us. But there is also a quieter, more subtle legacy, the legacy of connection. The aristocrats who ruled the Silk Road were not just wealth hoarders or conquerors, they were connectors. They built bridges between cultures, between empires, between people who would never have met had it not been for the flow of trade, and in doing so they created a world that was more interconnected, more complex, and more enriched by the exchange of goods and ideas. As we sit now reflecting on the past, we can see that the aristocrats of the Silk Road were in many ways visionaries. They understood that the true wealth of an empire did not lie in its gold, its land, or its soldiers. It lay in its ability to connect with the world, to build relationships, to bring together cultures, to create something greater than the sum of its parts. In a time when the world was still vast and separated by deserts, mountains, and seas, they knew that the greatest power came from creating bridges, not walls. Their legacy, then, is not just in the material wealth they accumulated, but in the lasting impact they had on the world's cultural landscape. The Silk Road may no longer be a physical highway, but the connections it created between East and West, between religions, between artists, between thinkers continue to shape the world we live in today. The desert winds may have blown across the trade routes, but they also carried with them the seeds of ideas that would grow and flourish in distant lands. And those seeds, planted long ago by the aristocrats who understood the value of connection, are still with us. As the winds of time blow, carrying with them the echoes of the past, we are left with the knowledge that the legacy of the Silk Road is not just a memory, but a living, breathing force that continues to shape the world. The aristocrats who built the bridges, who negotiated the deals, who traded in both material goods and ideas, they are still with us, not in the silks they traded or the gold they amassed, but in the very fabric of our culture, our art, our philosophy. And so, as we draw this journey to a close, let us reflect on the lasting impact of the Silk Road aristocrats. Their wealth may have been fleeting, but their influence is forever woven into the tapestry of human history. In their diplomacy, in their trade, in their ability to connect people across vast distances, they created a legacy that still resonates today. The desert winds blow, carrying the whispers of a time long past, but those whispers, like the Silk Road itself, are never truly gone. They are woven into the fabric of our world, a world forever shaped by the connections they made.